Jenna Burley's case, was at a friend's birthday party, found in a plastic container outside of town. It's difficult to judge a stranger's intentions based solely on their appearance or conversation. Sometimes, a stranger may seem perfectly presentable, behave politely, and act at first glance out of the best intentions, offering help. However, in reality, it's often precisely these individuals who lull their chosen victim into a false sense of security, luring them to a deserted place to rob, kidnap, take advantage of, or end their life. Unfortunately, the victim often realizes too late that they've fallen into a deadly trap. The story of an ordinary American student and popular blogger named Jenna Burley in 2017 shocked the entire country. Initially, thousands of people participated in the search for the missing girl, hoping she was alive. But when the terrifying truth was revealed, no one could believe what had happened. The girl had simply gone to celebrate her friend's birthday, but this party turned out to be the last night of her life. A tragic mix-up, intoxication, and the naive desire to trust a charming stranger who, coincidentally, offered his help, led to the tragedy. Who was Jenna Burley? Jenna Nicole Burley was born on November 4, 1994, in the capital of Pennsylvania, the city of Harrisburg, as the second of 4 children to Edward and Jacqueline Burley. Her parents met in the late 80s while attending university in Philadelphia, where mutual feelings quickly blossomed, and they never parted after that. The couple married in the fall of 1991, and in 1992 their first child was born, a daughter named Janelle. 2 years later, the heroine of our story was born, and soon after, their sons, Jeffrey and Jacob, followed one after the other. The Burleys dedicated themselves to helping others. Jacqueline worked in a nursing home, and Edward was employed at a hospital, specializing in patient rehabilitation after injuries and illnesses. The couple raised their children in an atmosphere of love and mutual understanding, striving to give them the best. Jenna was always very close to her parents, as well as her brothers and sister. She grew up as an active, positive, and energetic girl with a creative streak, strong charisma, and leadership qualities. She always had plenty of friends, performed well in school, acted in the school theater from a young age, and adored animals. The Burley family was neither wealthy nor struggling. They settled in Philadelphia in a spacious house located in the quiet, cozy neighborhood of Harleysville. Jenna easily integrated into any group, quickly made friends, and became the life of the party. In high school, the girl dreamed of becoming a fashion designer, constantly experimenting with looks and styles, sometimes appearing quite extravagant. Jenna wore bright makeup, dyed her hair in various colors, and dressed in different styles, sometimes resembling a hippie, other times an adherent of the emo subculture. She loved standing out from the crowd and encouraged her friends to challenge the mundane routine as well. The teenage girl frequently attended concerts, festivals, and other mass events that served as sources of inspiration for her. As she neared the end of high school, Burley's views and interests began to shift. Now she dreamed of a career in film rather than fashion design. She learned to create short films during classes at a local film studio, where her talent was already evident as she approached each storyline and creation process with creativity. At that time, Jenna also registered on several social networks where she actively maintained her pages, sharing her life, interests, and philosophical reflections on various pressing social issues. Very quickly, the high school senior gained a large following and her audience grew rapidly. People seemed to enjoy following this vibrant, creative girl who constantly experimented with her appearance and encouraged others to embrace self-expression. Before she knew it, Jenna had become a rather popular blogger, with an audience of several thousand followers. In 2013, the 18-year-old high school graduate enrolled in a prestigious college in sunny Florida, where she studied media arts and filmmaking. While studying, the student continued to actively maintain and develop her blog, sharing stories about campus life, the subjects she was studying, her community involvement, as well as parties and other entertainment with friends. Serious injury and prolonged depression. On December 20th, 2013, after completing just one semester of college, Jenna came home to celebrate Christmas with her family. At that time, Philadelphia had already seen snow, and the weather was quite harsh. Jenna didn't consider the sharp contrast from Florida and wore completely inappropriate shoes, which caused her to slip and fall, seriously injuring her ankle before even reaching the house. An X-ray revealed a double fracture with displacement, requiring surgery, along with the insertion of special pins and plates. For several months, Burley was literally confined to a wheelchair as she couldn't put any weight on her foot. She then had to relearn how to walk and attended daily physiotherapy sessions. During this period, she also managed to catch pneumonia, significantly complicating and prolonging her recovery. The student was forced to take an academic leave to focus on restoring her health, which greatly upset her. The only solace she found was in her personal blog, where she published excerpts from her journal entries and thoughts, and in social media, where Jenna actively communicated with her followers. Jenna posted new videos almost daily, answering questions and discussing various topics. A passionate animal rights activist, she spoke out against zoos, dolphinariums, and other places where animals are kept in captivity and exploited for entertainment. She also highlighted the difficult plight of the homeless, noting that in states with warm and mild climates, they have it much easier than in Pennsylvania, where those without a roof over their heads risk freezing to death on the streets. In addition, Jenna, who had already been engaged in regular charity work, began organizing fundraising efforts to donate essential items to animal shelters and homeless shelters. During her rehabilitation, Jenna took up making handmade jewelry which she sold online, donating all the proceeds to those in need. She actively encouraged her followers to donate unwanted items to charity, emphasizing that what might seem like trash cluttering a closet to some could be a real treasure for someone less fortunate. The recovery period dragged on, and Jenna ended up spending almost a year at home instead of just a few months. During this time, she adopted a dog from a local shelter whom she absolutely adored, and she mentioned her pet daily in her blog, sharing stories of how they spent their days together. But despite her seemingly optimistic outlook, Jenna fell into a deep depression. In the fall of 2014, she candidly admitted that she could no longer cope on her own and had to seek professional help from a psychiatrist. Burley spoke openly about the mental health challenges she faced, sharing her doctor's recommendations and discussing how her family and pet supported her. The blogger's audience grew several times during this period, as many young people related to the struggles she described and thanked her for her honesty. In early 2015, Jenna, along with her father and younger brother Jacob, went on a trip to sunny California. Jenna felt much better, as she wrote in her social media posts, and the happy photos from the ocean shore clearly showed the strong bond she had with her family. The eternal student. After fully recovering and taking the trip with her family, Jenna decided not to return to Florida, but instead transferred to a school in her hometown, choosing to live at her parents' house. She enrolled at Montgomery County Community College, a suburb of Philadelphia. Meanwhile, Burley continued to maintain her blog and produced short videos on various topics. In 2017, after earning a bachelor's degree in the humanities, Jenna decided to enroll in a university and became a student at Temple University's School of Film. Since the campus was only a half-hour drive away, Jenna chose not to move into a dormitory, but to stay at her family home. By that time, she had renovated her room and acquired her own car, so she didn't need to rely on family members for rides to class. At the time she entered the university, Jenna was already 22 years old, making her 4 to 5 years older than her classmates. Nevertheless, they were on the same wavelength, hanging out, having fun, attending concerts, and celebrating each other's birthdays. It's worth noting that Temple University is located almost in the center of the city and is one of the largest higher education institutions in the country. The campus is surrounded by numerous shops, shopping centers, restaurants, pubs, and other venues, so life here is bustling, you could say, 24/7. students always have a place to relax and unwind after classes. Classes began at the end of August, and just a few days later, Jenna got into a car accident on her way to school. Fortunately, she was wearing her seatbelt and wasn't injured, but her car was seriously damaged. From then on, her father or one of her younger brothers usually drove her to school in the mornings. Occasionally, Jenna would stay overnight at friends' houses if she stayed in the city late, always informing her parents beforehand. Fatal mix-up at the party. On Wednesday, August 30th, 2017, Jenna's classmate and close friend, named Davis, was planning to celebrate his birthday at one of the bars. Jenna was among those invited to the party and was supposed to stay overnight at the birthday boy's place so they could head to class together on Thursday morning. She informed her parents in advance so they wouldn't worry. That evening, Jenna, Davis, and 5 other friends had a great time, taking photos and posting them on social media. They hopped from bar to bar, meeting other friends along the way who joined their group, congratulating the birthday boy and toasting to his health. By around 11 p.m., the group had changed significantly, and everyone was pretty tipsy. Around midnight, the friends found themselves in a small sports bar that was packed with people. The birthday boy had stepped away because his friends had arranged a surprise for him, kidnapping him and taking him to another venue. He informed Burley about this and asked her to text him what time she would arrive at his apartment to spend the night. Jenna stayed in the bar with the rest of the group. Several people who were sober and driving offered Jenna a ride wherever she wanted to go, and a few classmates invited her to stay over at their place. But Jenna said she had already made plans with Davis and would go to his place. However, by around 1 a.m., friends began to leave, and Burley didn't notice that everyone who had offered her a place to stay or a ride had simply disappeared. A mix-up occurred, leading to tragic consequences. Jenna believed until the last moment that she would leave with someone from the bar, and she said goodbye to her friends, assuring them that she would stay a little longer. When she finally realized what was happening, she was sitting at the bar next to a group of strangers who soon left as well. The bar was closing at 2 a.m., and Jenna, realizing she was all alone, started texting Davis, asking him to come pick her up. However, the guy had fallen asleep at home, and his phone was in another room, so he didn't hear anything. Jenna tried to contact a few other friends, but they were either too drunk to respond or didn't hear their phones. She didn't want to bother her parents, and walking through the city alone at night didn't seem safe. The disappearance of the student. When Davis woke up in the morning, he thought Jenna had stayed over at someone else's place, but after checking his phone, he became seriously concerned. Jenna had tried to call him twice and sent several messages asking if he could pick her up from the bar, with the last message containing only 2 words: "Help me." He tried to call her back, but her phone was turned off. He still hoped that his friend was okay and would show up at class as usual, but Burley never appeared at the university. Davis called and visited all the friends who had partied with them at the bar the night before, but none of them had hosted the student. In the afternoon, one of Jenna's friends called her parents to ask if she had returned home. When they responded no, she explained what had happened, and within half an hour, Edward and Jacqueline rushed to the campus. They spoke with their daughter's friends, trying to find out who had seen her last and where. After getting no useful information, the Burleys immediately went to the police to report their daughter missing, insisting on an immediate search operation. The urgency of the situation was heightened by the messages asking for help that Jenna had sent to several classmates. The first places checked were the academic buildings and dormitories, but there was no sign of the missing student. The police then contacted local hospitals, but no women matching Jenna's description had been admitted in the past 24 hours. Everyone who had interacted with her the previous night confirmed that the last time they saw the student was at the sports bar. She was wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt with a motivational slogan on the front, and a light blue hoodie tied around her waist. Another distinguishing feature was her hairstyle, long black hair braided into 2 pigtails. Since Burley was a fairly popular blogger, news of her disappearance quickly spread across social media. Thousands of her followers posted messages asking for help in finding her and urged anyone with information to come forward. The generous and persistent stranger. When the police arrived at the bar where the missing student was last seen, the bartender immediately remembered the girl with the braids who stayed late after everyone else had left. She was quite drunk, seemed confused, and was constantly texting and calling someone. The signal from her phone was last detected in the same neighborhood around 2 a.m. Surveillance footage from the cameras at the entrance and inside the bar was reviewed. The detectives saw Jenna sitting alone at the bar, drinking a cocktail and sending messages. Around 1:30 a.m., a man approached her, started a conversation, and then bought her a drink. They sat together for about 20 minutes before leaving the bar just before it closed. They both appeared to be quite intoxicated as they were walking unsteadily. When the bartender was shown the footage and asked if he knew the man, he immediately recognized a regular customer and even named him Joshua Hupperters. According to the bartender, Joshua was almost a daily visitor, and the night before he seemed particularly interested in the lonely beauty, buying her cocktails and persistently inviting her to his place. The authorities discovered that Joshua had recently turned 29, had once attended Temple University but never graduated, having taken an extended academic leave. Despite this, he constantly hung out with students and lived just 5 minutes away from the bar where he was seen with Jenna. He rented a spacious apartment in a building across the street, which he shared with his friend, Jack Miley. It wasn't until later in the evening that they managed to reach Joshua, who claimed he had been very drunk the night before and didn't remember anything about a girl from the bar. He agreed to come in for questioning, but soon after, his phone was turned off, prompting the police to visit Hupperters' apartment themselves. The main suspect. Only Jack was home, and he let the detectives in without any fuss. The guy's apartment looked like a typical bachelor pad, with disorder reigning in nearly every room. Jack admitted that he and his friend had indeed gone to the sports bar the night before, where they drank heavily. Afterward, Joshua picked up some girl, and Jack decided to head home to give them privacy. Jack claimed he went straight to bed and didn't hear when his roommate came home or if he was alone. The next day, Joshua suddenly started cleaning the kitchen. He seemed worried, had fresh scratches on his face, and a deep cut on his hand. Joshua explained this as an unfortunate accident, saying he had fallen into some bushes while drunk. After lunch, he disappeared, taking some of his belongings with him, without telling his friend where he was going or how long he'd be gone, and his phone was turned off. The large apartment the guys lived in had a second exit leading to the backyard, where there were no surveillance cameras. Near the door, a pair of men's sandals with strange brownish stains were found, and on a dresser lay a roll of paper towels stained with something that looked like blood. There was also a strong smell of cleaning chemicals in the kitchen, and several empty bottles of cleaning products were scattered on the floor. All of this raised alarming suspicions, and from that point on, Joshua was considered the main suspect in the case of the missing student. The police decided to dig deeper into Hupperters' background and discovered that he was born and raised in Philadelphia, lost his father at an early age, who had been violently deprived of life, and this event had been traumatic for the child. Joshua enrolled at Temple University but never graduated, remaining a student until he was 29. He had a history of legal issues related to the distribution of prohibited substances which he sold to students. Additionally, he had served several months for burglary and had been charged multiple times for assaults on women in attempts to coerce them into intimacy. The search and first interrogation of the fugitive. It became clear that the suspect could be extremely dangerous, and there was still no information about the fate of the missing girl. The FBI joined the investigation, and soon it was determined that Joshua's phone had last been active in Wayne County, about 230 miles north of Philadelphia, near a lake. It was discovered that the fugitive's grandmother lived in that area, and he might be hiding at her house. Hupperters was indeed apprehended at his maternal grandmother's house. He appeared calm and didn't resist. He maintained that he didn't remember anything about the night of August 31st because he was drunk, and when asked about the fresh wounds on his body, he repeated the same story about falling into bushes that he had told his roommate Jack. He explained his sudden departure as wanting to spend the last weekend before the start of classes with family. When the police pointed out that they knew he wasn't enrolled in any university, he fell silent and demanded a lawyer. Meanwhile, experts working at the fugitive's apartment in Philadelphia found traces of blood on the floor, plumbing, and in the trash can. They were waiting for the test results to determine whose blood it was, and the hope of finding the missing girl alive was fading with each passing minute. During the search of Joshua's room, several bags of various prohibited substances were found, along with about $20,000 in cash. The mysterious container. Detectives continued to search Hupperter's residence, including the backyard accessible through the second door. In the corner trash bins, which fortunately had not yet been emptied, a black bag was found containing a light blue hoodie and a t-shirt with slogans, along with a sports bra and a black hair tie with a few dark strands of hair. The clothing found in the trash closely resembled what Jenna was wearing on the day she disappeared. To make matters worse, there were bloodstains on the items, making the chances of finding the girl alive seem almost non-existent. Nevertheless, the search continued, and the suspect remained silent. On September 2nd, Hupperter's stepfather unexpectedly called the police, reporting that on August 31st, the man had visited his mother's house in Jenkintown. He had arrived by taxi, carrying a large, opaque plastic container that was very heavy. Joshua explained that it contained his books and some personal belongings. He left the container in the garage and left early the next morning, taking another taxi. The stepfather found this suspicious, as the container was unusually heavy and gave off a strange feeling. Knowing his stepson's criminal past, the elderly man decided to inform the police without telling his wife. He didn't know where Joshua went afterward, but heard him asking the driver not to log the trip in the app, promising to pay in cash. The grisly discovery in the shed. By the time the stepfather called, Hupperter's had already been apprehended, and a search of his grandmother's house had yielded no suspicious findings. The fate of the mysterious plastic container remained unknown, and the authorities suspected it might have been sunk in a lake. They considered involving divers in the search, but the case took an unexpected turn. It turned out that Joshua's grandmother's husband had a small shed located a significant distance from the house, nearly hidden by overgrown bushes and trees. The man stored an old boat and fishing gear there, though he hadn't used them in a long time. On September 3rd, he decided to check the shed and noticed the lock on the door was broken. Suspecting thieves, he entered but found everything in its place, except for a strange container that hadn't been there before. He opened the container and recoiled in horror. Inside was the severely mutilated naked body of a young woman. He immediately called the police to report the gruesome discovery. The authorities quickly realized whose remains the pensioner had found in his shed and called in Burley's parents for identification. Jenna's mother fainted, and her father nearly had a heart attack when their worst fears were confirmed. The crime scene. Through witness testimony and surveillance footage, investigators established that Hupperter's had plied the already intoxicated girl with more alcohol and then lured her to his home. When Jenna realized she was trapped, she managed to send several friends messages asking for help, but none responded. At the apartment, Joshua attacked the girl and tried to force her into intimacy, but she fought back fiercely, scratching the criminal and cutting his hand with a kitchen knife. However, he managed to knock the knife out of her hand and repeatedly slammed her head against the floor. He incapacitated Jenna and took advantage of her before strangling the poor girl with his bare hands. He then placed her body in a container he found in the storage room and cleaned up the crime scene as best he could. The autopsy revealed that Jenna died from mechanical asphyxiation. Her body showed numerous abrasions, bruises, and even bite marks. She also had a traumatic brain injury and signs of intimate assault. The blood found on the shoes and paper towels in the apartment was hers, her hair was on the hair tie in the trash can, and the blood and semen found on her clothing matched the defendant's. The trial and sentencing. Hupperters refused to take a plea deal or admit guilt, even though his culpability was never in doubt. Furthermore, a search of his grandmother's house revealed a backpack containing his documents, cash, and a few essentials, indicating that the criminal had intended to flee and was caught just in time. The trial of the criminal and assailant began only in the spring of 2019, a year and a half after the horrific crime. The defense attorneys desperately tried to shift all the blame onto the deceased girl, claiming that she had voluntarily come to Joshua's apartment and provoked him. However, the defense's statements sparked outrage among everyone present. After 9 days of hearings, the defendant was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 60 years. One summer day in 2014, the New York Police Department received an unexpected call from a woman requesting to speak with the detective handling the Shell Colin case. The caller was Deborah Holmes, and she urgently requested a meeting with the investigators. Receiving such surprising news, they hoped this unexpected call might help thaw the long, stagnant investigation into a tragic loss that had been at a standstill for 5 years. It was about the case of Shelley Danishevsky's tragic demise, which had caused a stir in Manhattan on the eve of New Year's 2010. Shell Kovlin grew up on the West Side, immersed in an Orthodox Jewish community. Her family's deep-seated roots in this tight-knit neighborhood shaped her upbringing. Shelley's journey from a blissful childhood to an accomplished adulthood was marked by her love for learning and academic excellence. This passion for knowledge eventually led her to a prestigious degree in asset management, opening doors to a thriving career in the Swiss banking sector. Her rapid ascent in the financial world saw her skillfully managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for her clients. In 1998, despite a successful career in one of the world's wealthiest cities, Shelley felt a void in her life. She had financial security and a loving family, yet her dream of having her own family and becoming a mother remained unfulfilled. In February 1998, determined to change her destiny, Shelley attended a Jewish singles event aimed at helping those seeking their significant other. It was there that she met 26-year-old Rod Kovlin, a fellow professional in the banking sector. The young couple shared many common interests, both driven by ambitions for success and stability in life. Their connection was instant and profound. The relationship blossomed rapidly as they complemented each other perfectly, disregarding the notable age difference. Shelley and Rod were inseparable, spending every moment together. Their love was so intense that shortly after meeting, they decided to get married. Despite some acquaintances considering it a hasty decision, for Rod and Shelley, everything felt just right. The happy couple soon welcomed 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, completing their family. On New Year's Eve 2009, the idyllic life of the Kovlin family was shattered by a tragic accident that led to Shell's death. Initially, the police deemed it a freak mishap. At the early stage of the investigation, they were convinced it was just that. Early in the morning of December 31st, at the Manhattan police station, 2 officers wrapping up their night shift were discussing their holiday plans over coffee. However, the calm atmosphere was abruptly disrupted at 7:30 a.m. by an urgent phone call. Rod Kovlin from the Upper West Side, in a frantic state, informed the officers about bizarre occurrences at his ex-wife Shelley Danishevsky's house. He had found her in her bathtub, submerged in blood-stained water, lifeless. Emergency services hoped Rod could provide the necessary assistance to save the victim. Following the operator's instructions over the phone, Rod pulled her out of the water and attempted resuscitation, but it soon became clear that saving her life was impossible. Shelley's body was cold and motionless. A distraught Rod covered her with a blanket he found in the bedroom and waited for the police to arrive. Thus, on the last day of 2009, Manhattan witnessed a heartbreaking event in the life of Rod Kovlin. The police team arrived swiftly at the scene of the incident. Upon arrival, they quickly assessed the situation and cordoned off a central street in Manhattan. They were greeted by a lavish residence just steps away from the city park. The Upper West Side was known for its safety, and the officers initially surmised that Shel Danishevsky's death was another tragic case of self-harm. Entering the apartment, they found children's toys scattered around, not unusual given the upcoming holiday. They then proceeded to the bathroom, where the woman's body, wrapped in a blanket by her husband, lay. The bloody water in the tub and the wet floor indicated that Rod had recently pulled the body from the water. A wound on the back of Shel's head, still bleeding, was noticeable. Surveying the bathroom, the officers noted an open cabinet door with a torn hinge, suggesting the woman might have slipped and torn it off while trying to hold onto the door. Forensic experts who arrived shortly after conducted a thorough examination to rule out other possible causes of the tragic incident. After a careful inspection, they determined there was no break-in and no signs of a struggle were found. Investigators increasingly leaned towards the belief that Shel's death was an accident. The detective handling the case decided to speak with family members. During their questioning, it was revealed that Shelley and Rod's 9-year-old daughter was the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized and shocked by what she had seen, the girl managed to tell the police officer how everything happened. It turned out that the previous night, she and her younger brother had been sleeping in their mother's bed, a fairly common occurrence. Waking up in the middle of the night and noticing her mother's absence, she went to look for her and stumbled upon the horrifying scene in the bathroom. The frightened child hurriedly contacted her father for help. Rod and Shelley had just separated, and he had moved into a new apartment in the same building on the same floor. Crossing the corridor was all it took to reach his apartment. The girl called her father, who was nearby, and arrived immediately. Entering the bathroom, he pulled Shelley's body from the water and called for emergency services. The girl's account matched exactly what Rod had described, confirming the theory of an accidental death. The police informed Shel's relatives about the tragedy, which deeply shocked everyone. The autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the day after the body was found. However, surprisingly, it never took place. When the medical examiner called the investigators to start the examination, he unexpectedly learned that despite its necessity, the procedure would not be conducted. This baffled the examiner, wondering how this could happen. It turned out that a rabbi from the synagogue Shel frequented had intervened. He contacted an organization responsible for the burial of Orthodox Jews, which then requested the police for permission to access the tragedy site for religious rites required by the victim's family's faith. Permission was granted, and a team, accompanied by the rabbi, arrived at the scene. They cleaned the bathtub of blood traces and prepared Shel's body before the burial. All collected evidence and clues were destroyed before reaching the police's forensic department. The organization acted swiftly because autopsies are considered taboo in Orthodox Jewish tradition, seen as desecrating the deceased's body. In this case, the synagogue's rabbi exerted pressure on Shel's family. Grieving relatives and husband, appreciative of the rabbi's assistance, and with no doubts about the accidental nature of the incident, didn't object to his help. The family also agreed to forgo the autopsy, leaving the funeral arrangements to the burial preparation organization. Thus, within 24 hours, Shella was buried. Hundreds of people attended to pay their last respects and offer condolences to the family. Later, upon learning from the police that potential clues were destroyed during the cleaning of the bathroom, doubts about the official version of Shel's death began to haunt her parents. A fall in the bathtub certainly posed a risk, but the likelihood of death from such an accident seemed increasingly improbable to them. Although nothing substantiated their doubts, the thought that their daughter's demise was not accidental troubled them deeply. Since the evidence was destroyed, the New York Police Department lost the opportunity for further investigation, prompting the family to hire a private detective to clarify the circumstances and verify if Shel's death was indeed due to a tragic fall. The private investigator hired by the woman's relatives began unraveling this peculiar case, first visiting the deceased's family home to speak with the relatives. From their statements, he learned that Rod and Shel's relationship was far from perfect, and their marriage had been facing serious challenges. The couple had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008, but soon after, their marital bliss began to crumble. Rod faced difficulties in his career, frequently changing jobs. It was revealed that he had developed a gambling addiction, investing huge sums in it. These behavioral changes worried Shelley. She was dissatisfied with her husband neglecting the family, spending extensive time on computer games. Rod was using their savings for backgammon tournaments, which Shell had complained about to her close ones, frustrated by the amount of family money he spent on his numerous travels. Additionally, she discovered that he had been unfaithful during his many trips. It's important to note that Shelley was neither passive nor naive regarding her husband's behavior. Upon discovering his infidelities through his emails, she decided to end their marital relationship and obtained permission for a religious divorce. Externally, the couple still appeared as spouses, but Rod had moved into another apartment in the same building. An official divorce required some time to process. Despite their separation and strained relations, Shelley and Rod tried to maintain a friendly facade, especially for their children. However, conflicts and disagreements often arose due to Rod's behavior. Shell had recently expressed to her close ones her grievances about her husband, describing him as aggressive and hot-tempered. She felt he was monitoring her, entering her apartment when she wasn't home and checking her emails. She also suspected that Rod had installed a camera in the building's corridor to see when she came home. These complexities in their marital life could have been grounds for further investigation into Shell's death. Gathering all these details, the private detective proposed the theory that Rod might have been involved in his wife's demise. He needed to conduct further investigations to uncover the whole truth. The detective's first goal was to determine if a crime had indeed taken place at the scene where the body was found. He planned to inspect Shell's apartment but encountered a problem. The door was sealed. Without hesitation, he obtained a court order to access the site, and with it, accompanied by New York police officers, he arrived at the scene. He attempted to unlock the door with a key provided in advance, but the stubborn lock resisted for some time. After a few moments, Rod Coughlin emerged from his apartment at the end of the corridor. He claimed to have heard noise and came to check what was happening. Upon questioning by the police and the detective, Rod took the key and effortlessly opened the door. This raised some questions for the detective. Did Rod really just happen to hear sounds in the corridor, or was he intentionally monitoring the situation? Once inside the apartment, the detective focused intently on finding evidence to support his theory of murder. According to Shell's relatives, she was home on December 31st, but her phone was missing. The detective thoroughly searched all rooms, only finding the woman's phone charger, while the phone itself was not located. The detective also faced the task of examining the bathroom, the site of Shell's demise. He paid special attention to the hinge that investigators believed she had torn off during a fall. The more he examined this item, the more he doubted that Shell could have torn off the metal detail, which was securely attached to the cabinet. It would have required immense strength, and even considering the woman's weight, there were significant doubts about such a possibility. After a long discussion with law enforcement, the detective tried to convince them that this was not an accident, but a homicide. The investigators were not persuaded, citing a lack of evidence. As a result, a decision was made to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. The impending exhumation of Shell's body sparked serious contemplation and debate within her family. More than 2 weeks had passed since her burial, and it was a difficult decision for her loved ones to make. In the Jewish religion, such interventions are viewed very negatively, and religious leaders often oppose this practice. The family needed time to decide. Despite the prohibitions, they deemed it crucial to uncover the truth about their daughter's death and agreed to the exhumation. However, this step was complicated not only by moral considerations. To carry out the exhumation, a special order from the prosecutor's office was required, which was not easy to obtain. Despite the family's consent, it took almost 3 months. After securing the necessary documents, the exhumation and autopsy were conducted. The results were startling. The examination revealed that Shell did not die from a fall but from asphyxiation due to violent strangulation, which had broken her neck bones. Consequently, the official version of her death changed. No longer could her passing be considered an accident, and it was officially recognized that the young woman had been murdered. The detective's efforts and suspicions proved to be well-founded. The autopsy results of Shell's body played a pivotal role, prompting the New York Police Department to immediately resume the investigation into her death. Investigators began meticulously examining new details, including phone call records and bank statements, all information crucial in a murder investigation. Besides family members, everyone who had any interaction with Rod and Shelley was questioned: the nanny, housekeeper, and even the lawyer handling their divorce. The lawyer informed the police about the oddities he had observed in the couple's behavior. At the first divorce hearing in May 2009, Rod claimed he couldn't pay alimony due to unemployment. The judge jokingly suggested that Rod might have to give up his favorite games, which infuriated him in the courtroom, revealing his true nature to everyone. Rod didn't stop there. He sought revenge against Shell, accusing her of an indecent lifestyle, misusing funds, and even calling her employer with slanderous claims about drugs and violence towards their son. These false accusations caused significant trouble for Shelley. An investigation initiated based on these claims found no evidence to support her husband's words. However, the most appalling aspect of this story was when Rod and Shell's son revealed how his father had coached him to say phrases aimed at discrediting his mother. Rod paid a heavy price for his vile actions. At a new divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, he was prohibited from being alone with his children, a measure that remained in effect even after Shelley's death. Rod was not granted custody of his children, and a social worker handed them over to Rod's parents, inciting his rage. He likely believed that he would finally take responsibility for his children. Police also interviewed a woman who had previously cared for Rod's children before being dismissed by him. She provided detectives with intriguing information. It turned out that on December 30th, Shelley underwent an expensive keratin hair treatment worth several $100s. Post-treatment recommendations included avoiding moisture and heat exposure for several days, thus prohibiting baths or showers. This raised a question. Why would Shelley risk damaging her hair by disregarding these recommendations? Investigators speculated that Shelley didn't take a bath on the day of her death. However, their conclusions weren't direct evidence, and it was insufficient to charge anyone with murder based on this alone. Detectives also reviewed the building's surveillance footage where the couple lived. On the day of the murder, they noticed Rod's peculiar behavior. At 4 a.m., he left his apartment dressed as if he was going outside. He returned after some time. The night watchman at the building's entrance, who was interrogated, found Rod's early morning outing unusual, as he had never left so early before. The watchman remembered Rod asking if he needed anything, to which he replied negatively. However, Rod returned a few minutes later with chocolate bars, offering them to him. The investigators believed Rod's behavior was deliberate to create an alibi for himself. Rod now became the primary suspect, and the investigators' task was to prove his guilt by any means necessary. Their main question was, what could have driven Rod to murder his wife? During the investigation, despite 2 divorce hearings, Shelley and Rod were still officially married, meaning that without a will or divorce, the property would automatically go to Rod. It was a matter of over $5 million. Another crucial point was that on December 31, 2009, Shelley had made an appointment with her lawyer to change her will, intending to exclude her husband. This undoubtedly was a blow to Rod and provided a motive for the crime. The money, $5 million, which Rod could lose, was undoubtedly such a motive. Since he was already a suspect, all of Shell's assets were transferred to a secure account, pending further evidence of his involvement in the crime. It was clear that if Rod had been monitoring his wife, he could have known about her meeting with the lawyer to remove him from the will. Investigators suspected that Rod had installed spyware to track his wife. Surveillance footage also showed Shelley returning home at 8 p.m. the night before, talking on the phone, which was never found after the crime. Now they knew for sure the phone was in the apartment. They decided to conduct another search of the crime scene. Upon returning to the apartment, the investigators didn't have to look long. They couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Shell's mobile phone calmly lying on her bedside table, connected to the charger. Neither during the New York Police's initial search, nor during the private detective's examination, had anyone noticed the device in this location. Furthermore, investigators had photographed the room during previous searches, and the phone wasn't on the bedside table in the photos. There was only one explanation. Rod had brought the mobile phone back into Shell's sealed apartment. Whether this act was a foolish mistake or a deliberate taunt of the investigation was anyone's guess. Rod was called in for questioning, but he had already hired a lawyer who advised him to remain silent. The investigators had to continue looking for new evidence of his involvement. After examining Rod's phone records, police found frequent calls to a number registered in Jacksonville, North Carolina. The number belonged to Deborah Holmes, a married woman with 3 children. She was 14 years older than Rod. They had met at a backgammon competition 5 months before Shell's murder and had a passionate affair. The lovers met during backgammon tournaments or played online together. The investigators saw a chance to find a lead and decided to call the woman to ask her a few questions. To their surprise, Deborah responded that her lawyer had advised her not to speak to them. Confronted with another refusal, law enforcement officials decided to inquire about the name of the attorney. It turned out to be the same lawyer representing Rod Coughlin. The police's last hope rested on finding compromising messages or electronic correspondence between Rod and Deborah. They hoped to discover these on Sheely's recently found phone. Unfortunately, all messages had been professionally deleted. Even expert programmers couldn't retrieve the data. Rod had meticulously planned everything, seemingly mocking the authorities. Days turned into months and years, and it became apparent that Rod Coughlin was evading justice. Perhaps the crime he committed was perfect, but the rabbi's cleanup of the bathroom, erasing all traces of blood and other evidence, played a crucial role. This action destroyed all potential DNA, fingerprints, or fibers, complicating the investigation, which increasingly dragged on. Rod never admitted to his crime, and the lack of evidence prevented the case from going to trial. 5 years had passed since the investigation into Sheely's demise began, yet no arrests had been made. After years of fruitless searches for clues and evidence of Rod Coughlin's involvement in his wife's demise, the suspect's mistress suddenly came forward. Following her phone call, the police invited her to the station. Deborah Holmes immediately came in. It turned out that she and Rod had broken up a few months earlier, prompting her to contact the police. What she shared with the investigators over the next 3 days shocked them. Deborah had much to reveal. She told them about Rod's plans concerning custody of his children. Since Rod was still a suspect in his wife's demise and had no custody rights over the children, he couldn't access his deceased wife's money. Rod was prepared to do anything to seize Sheely's millions and had hatched a vile plan. Coughlin planned to convince his 15-year-old daughter to fake an assault, later accusing his father, Rod's dad, of the crime. This would land the grandfather in jail, losing custody rights over the grandchildren. Rod hoped his daughter would agree to his plan in exchange for money. Meanwhile, the criminal had been regularly withdrawing money from the only account he had access to, the one where Sheely had deposited funds for their children's education. Rod's parents noticed he was squandering the savings, which should have been for his daughter and son's future. They were very unhappy with his lack of interest in his children's lives, leading to a dispute. Rod was so angry with his parents that he seriously contemplated ending their lives. In 2012, Rod Coughlin confided his plan to Deborah. He intended to have his daughter put rat poison in her grandparents' tea. Since the girl was a minor, Rod calculated she would spend much less time in prison than he would. Deborah persuaded her lover to abandon this evil intent. Following this, Rod conceived several other ideas. At one point, he contemplated burning down his parents' house, jamming the doors to trap them inside. He also considered arranging a sham marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, after which she would have to relinquish part of her inheritance to her father. Listening to Deborah's testimony, the police couldn't believe the reality of such details. All this time, she had been gathering evidence, amassing a trove of data on hard drives. Realizing she was dealing with a psychopath, she cautiously waited for Rod to lose interest in her before handing these valuable insights over to the investigators. The recordings contained hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Rod's conversations with various people. Now the law enforcement officers had to meticulously listen to these gigabytes of data in search of convincing evidence. Deborah's contribution to this complex investigation was significant. As investigators began analyzing the recordings, they discovered something astonishing. In a conversation with a backgammon acquaintance, Rod inadvertently mentioned having keys to Shelley's apartment and the ability to enter it at any time. These hard drives became a real treasure for the police, extracting hundreds of materials related to the case. Investigators found that Rod was plotting against his own daughter, planning to pin the responsibility for the mother's demise on her. In an email address that the father used to forge an email, it was claimed that the daughter admitted to lying and that her mother didn't just fall. According to the fabricated story, they had an argument in the evening, and in anger, she pushed her mother in the bathroom. Thanks to all the information gathered, the police finally had compelling evidence to charge Rod Kovlin with the demise of his wife. On November 1st, 2015, Rod Kovlin was arrested. Shelley's family awaited the trial of their daughter's perpetrator, but victory was not assured. The charges were circumstantial, and a skilled lawyer could instill doubt in the jurors' minds. Detectives continued their investigation, gathering new data and meticulously verifying all evidence. Soon, irrefutable proof emerged from an unexpected source. While in prison, Rod Kovlin revealed details of his wife's demise to a fellow inmate. He described his actions in detail, even mimicking the gesture he used to strangle her. The police requested surveillance footage and found it perfectly matched the autopsy results. This was direct evidence of Rod's guilt, almost amounting to a confession. The trial lasted 7 long weeks. During this time, the jury heard all the heinous plans Kovlin intended to execute, including taking his wife's life, targeting his parents, and framing his own children. The jury was appalled by his cold-blooded and deceitful nature. It took them 2 days to reach a final verdict. In March 2019, the court found Rod Kovlin guilty of the demise of Shelley Danishevsky, his wife, and the mother of his children. Despite the lack of direct evidence, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. Shelley Kovlin was a successful and determined woman who sought simple family happiness. However, a ruthless, greedy monster crossed her path, destroying not only her life, but also those of her children and loved ones. This tragic story found justice thanks to Deborah Holmes's determination. The criminal was punished for his horrific actions. Deborah's courage likely helped not only in achieving justice, but also in preventing possible future crimes. Rod Kovlin will never again harm his family or the citizens of New York. A young mother who never believed her husband would take her life. Manipulation is a type of social and psychological influence where one person seeks to change another person's perception and behavior for their own interests. Manipulators typically follow similar patterns, resorting to deception, blackmail, and moral or physical abuse. Often, their methods can be so intricate and cunning that the victim doesn't realize they are acting in the manipulator's interest. This frequently happens when the victim is in love with the manipulator and trusts only them. The case of Maria Fernanda Quesada was classified as femicide, a deliberate crime against a woman by a man. The most horrifying aspect of this crime was that it was entirely predictable, and those close to the girl considered the tragedy just a matter of time. Maria herself was afraid of her abusive husband, but loved him and wanted to keep the family together for the sake of their children, so she gave in to his manipulation. She blindly trusted her partner and did not sense danger when he invited her to a fateful meeting. Maria Fernanda Quesada, childhood, family, and early years. A girl named Maria Fernanda Quesada was born on June 18, 1994, in the town of La Garita, located in the Guanacaste province in northern Costa Rica. She was the only child in the family, and her birth was a true miracle for the Quesada couple. Maria's mother had been treated for infertility for many years, and doctors had given up hope, claiming she would never have children. However, despite all the forecasts, she managed to conceive and gave birth to a healthy child. Her parents showered her with love and care, striving to protect her from all troubles and provide her with everything she needed. From a young age, Maria dreamed of having a large family with brothers and sisters, but her mother's health prevented her from having more children, so Maria remained an only child. The girl then decided that she would one day create a large, happy family of her own and have at least 3 children. The Quesadas worked hard, and, by the standards of their native province, were considered well off. They aimed to give their only daughter the best education possible and fostered the development of her talents and abilities in every way. The family lived in a spacious, cozy home, and Maria had the opportunity to study music and attend art school. Maria had warm and trusting relationships with all family members, but she was especially close to her maternal aunt. Her mother's younger sister was only 6 years older than Maria, so they grew up as close friends, sharing secrets and being almost inseparable from a young age. Quesada excelled in school, had a creative nature, and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Those around her described her as a kind, bright, empathetic, and friendly person, always ready to lend a hand. She always had many friends, easily connected with people, and was very attractive. Single mother. At 18, Maria started dating a boy she had known since school. Their relationship developed quickly. The young man seemed reliable and loving to Maria, but everything fell apart when she told him she was pregnant. The young man, who was her age, was completely unprepared for family life and raising a child. He immediately suggested she terminate the pregnancy, and when she refused, he declared that their relationship was over. Maria was devastated, but still hoped that after the baby was born, the father would change his mind and come back. However, by then, her ex-boyfriend was already seeing someone else and wanted nothing to do with the son he had fathered. Maria's main support came from her parents and aunt, who helped and financially supported her and her son. The young mother knew she couldn't rely on her relatives forever and needed to provide for her son on her own. She began looking for ways to earn a living, wanting her work to bring her joy. Soon, she discovered online lessons on soap making and crafting decorative candles from wax. Being a creative person, Maria was drawn to this activity and saw great potential in it. Maria threw herself into making handmade candles and soap, selling her products online. She created social media groups to advertise her goods and took individual orders for custom candles and soap tailored to customers' specific preferences. Her business quickly gained momentum. Her social media following grew rapidly, and with it, so did her orders. She continuously improved her craft, aiming to become a top-notch artisan, and dreamed of saving enough money to open her own shop. Meanwhile, Maria also started teaching online soap-making classes, earning a decent income. She continued to live with her parents and son, saving for her own home, and dreamed of getting an education, a frightening suitor. Maria worked hard, but she never stopped dreaming of meeting a worthy man with whom she could build a strong, happy family, someone who would love her growing son as his own. Her loved ones shared this dream, but when she brought her new partner into their home, they were filled with anxiety and fear for her future. In the fall of 2017, Quesada went to the city to buy supplies for making soap and candles. While she was shopping, a charming young man named Esteban Rivera Vargas approached her. He paid her a few compliments, saying he was captivated by her beauty and couldn't resist coming over to introduce himself. Esteban seemed polite and genuine, quickly charming Maria and earning her trust, so she agreed to take a walk with him and have coffee. After a brief conversation, Maria gave him her phone number, marking the beginning of their unexpected romance. Esteban was 12 years older than Maria, but she didn't see the significant age difference as an obstacle to their happy future. She fell in love with him from the day they met, though it was a mystery to those around her what had won her over. Vargas was the complete opposite of Maria. He was harsh, rude, constantly used foul language, and had many bad habits. But most importantly, he never spoke about his past. Officially, he didn't have a job, but he had substantial savings that many suspected were obtained through dishonest means. Esteban owned a firearm, which he kept in the glove compartment of his old pickup truck. He rarely parted with the pistol, but never explained why. Maria suspected that her lover might be connected to the criminal world, but she was too afraid to ask him directly. She also knew nothing about his past relationships. About 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided to introduce Esteban to her family. She was very nervous about her parents' reaction, and it turned out she had every reason to be. Esteban behaved provocatively, was rude, used foul language, and any questions or remarks provoked anger and sudden outbursts. He openly frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left their home, they began urging their daughter to break off the relationship, fearing for her safety. However, Maria was not just in love. She was truly blinded by her feelings and refused to listen to any arguments. She naively believed that her love, care, and support would help her lover manage his fits of rage, that he would eventually calm down, settle, and become a good husband to her and a caring father to her son, as well as to the children they would have together, which she longed for, a family like his. A couple of weeks after meeting Quesada's parents, Esteban decided to introduce Maria to his family. He invited her to a family dinner at his mother's house, but the event turned into a nightmare for Maria. The Vargas family members were just as hot-tempered, aggressive, and arrogant as Esteban. They used foul language, communicated loudly, and any argument could instantly escalate into a fight. They treated their son's new love interest with disdain, making derogatory remarks, and even comparing her to his ex-girlfriends. They didn't like that Maria already had a child from a previous relationship, and they made no effort to hide their feelings. Maria held back tears of hurt and humiliation with all her might. To make matters worse, Esteban's relatives also had a fondness for strong drinks, and when intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and unpredictable. Maria found them cruel and malicious, a sentiment she candidly shared with her parents. Her father and mother once again tried to convince their daughter to break up with Esteban and stay away from him and his family. However, Maria remained adamant, believing that things would settle over time, especially since Esteban tried to behave himself when she was around. A hellish marriage. In December 2018, Maria told her partner that she was expecting his child. Esteban was not overly thrilled by the news, but he agreed that it was time for them to make their relationship official. The couple got married on April 6, 2019, when the bride was 4 months pregnant. They had a beautiful wedding with a white dress and a beachside ceremony. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved into a small house owned by Esteban. But from the very first days of their married life, he began to show his true colors. He no longer held back his outbursts of rage, threw tantrums over nothing, and didn't hesitate to use his fists. Insults, beatings, and humiliations became routine in their home, all witnessed by Maria's 5-year-old son. For several months, Maria not only endured all this, but also kept it secret from everyone. She avoided visiting her family so they wouldn't see the bruises on her face and body, wore long sleeves even in the heat, and carefully concealed the marks around her eyes with makeup to avoid attracting neighbors' attention. However, she grew increasingly fearful for the life of her unborn child and worried about how this situation would affect her older son. Maria believed that after the baby was born, Esteban would soften and fatherhood would do him good. She endured daily abuse, accusations, and humiliation, all while Esteban skillfully shifted the blame onto her, reminding her that he had accepted her with a child that no one else wanted. He expertly manipulated her emotions, knowing that the woman in love wouldn't leave, understanding how to frighten her and make her comply. Quesada was terrified of being alone again, this time with 2 children, and this became Esteban's primary lever of control. However, shortly before the birth, after another brutal beating, Maria hastily packed her things, took her son, and fled to her parents. They were shocked by her appearance, as there wasn't a single unmarked spot on her body, and urged her to go to the police, but she flatly refused. Caring father. In the last few weeks before giving birth, Maria lived in her parents' home, still hoping that the birth of her child would improve the situation, so she was in no hurry to file for divorce. Her family was less optimistic and urged her to end the marriage as soon as possible, but she wouldn't listen. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a son, and she immediately informed her husband by phone. Esteban rushed to the hospital within 15 minutes, looking happy yet bewildered. He got on his knees, begging his wife for forgiveness, pleading with her to return to him, and promising that everything would change now. Maria believed him and went home with the children after being discharged. It's needless to say that Quesada's parents were shocked by their daughter's decision. They understood that this was just a ploy and manipulation by their son-in-law, but Maria refused to listen. It all ended in a major argument, with Maria stating that if she had to choose, she would choose Esteban. Her parents didn't want to spoil their relationship with their only daughter or lose the chance to see their grandchildren, so they had to accept her decision. For the first few months, the new father did spend nearly all his time with his wife and newborn son. He surrounded them with care and even took on some household duties. However, he treated his stepson with a cool detachment. The stepfather didn't mistreat the boy, but it was evident that he was uncomfortable interacting with the child, although he tried not to show it. Moreover, Esteban officially got a job, and it seemed like he was doing everything for the well-being of his family. Maria couldn't be happier, as everything was now unfolding exactly as she had dreamed, but her happiness was fleeting and short-lived. Nonetheless, this brief respite even made Maria's relatives reassess their opinion of Esteban and believe that he had indeed changed for the better. Under one roof with a monster. The family idyll lasted precisely 1 year, but shortly after celebrating their son's first birthday, Esteban seemed to snap. All the anger, rage, and cruelty that he had been suppressing burst out, turning their home into a real torture chamber. He mercilessly beat his wife, broke several of her ribs, and nearly deprived her of an eye. In terror, Maria fled to her parents, who once again begged her to go to the police, but she refused. A few days later, Esteban came, apologized, and asked her to return home. To everyone's astonishment, Maria agreed, explaining that she still believed in her husband and hoped they could return to their previous happy life. Over the next few months, Maria repeatedly ended up in the hospital with serious injuries, but she always blamed everything on ridiculous household accidents to avoid involving the police. Neighbors regularly heard screams and shouting from the couple's house and even witnessed the man beating his wife. However, Maria always begged them not to call the authorities. People in the area were afraid of Esteban because they didn't know what to expect from him and feared he could attack at any moment. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation reached a breaking point, that Maria, fearing for her life and the safety of her sons, contacted the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a tyrant, manipulator, and outright sadist, so she moved back into her parents' home with her children. Moreover, she managed to obtain a restraining order against Esteban, prohibiting him from approaching her and the boys. Quesada documented the injuries, and doctors recorded numerous bruises, contusions, and abrasions of varying stages of healing on her body, indicating systematic and brutal beatings. Her relatives, as well as neighbors, confirmed that Vargas regularly assaulted his wife and threatened her with harm. As a result, the court forbade him from approaching his wife and contacting their child without her consent. However, the restraining order didn't deter Esteban, who regularly showed up at Quesada's house. He would wait for Maria to step outside and insist on talking, but she would always rush back inside to avoid him. Eventually, she only left the house accompanied by relatives, fearing an attack by her husband, a brutal attack and child abduction. Maria filed for divorce almost immediately, and now the couple faced a complicated process of dividing their assets and deciding custody of their son. She filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, supported by medical reports documenting her injuries and witness statements from neighbors and relatives. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of the child. It was clear that Esteban had his own plans, and on March 3, 2022, despite the court order, he came to the house of his still legally married wife's parents. He looked completely calm, behaved politely, and asked to speak with Maria. Her parents tried to turn him away, but he was persistent. A few minutes later, Maria herself appeared at the door and agreed to talk to him privately. It's unclear what exactly Esteban said to her, but he was very convincing, and Maria agreed to go with him to their shared home to settle some issues. Moreover, she took their son with her because Esteban convinced her that he missed the child and wanted to spend time with him. Her parents were adamantly against their daughter and grandson going anywhere with this dangerous man, but Maria assured them that nothing bad would happen. She took the child, got into Esteban's car, and that was the last time her parents saw their only daughter alive. The couple started arguing in the car. By the time they reached their house, Esteban was yelling and using foul language at Maria, as witnessed and overheard by the neighbors. The couple, along with their young son, entered the house, where the situation escalated. The shouting didn't stop, and soon it was accompanied by loud crashes, as if furniture was being broken and dishes were being smashed. Then came the sound of a child crying and Maria's desperate call for help. Neighbors called emergency services, and a man living across the street rushed over to help. As he approached, the front door flew open, and Esteban appeared on the threshold, covered in blood. In one hand, he held the crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His gaze was wild, and his face twisted in rage. The neighbor backed off, fearing for the boy's life, while Vargas jumped into the car and sped away at high speed. When the police arrived, they found the mutilated body of a young woman with no signs of life. Maria lay in the kitchen in a pool of her own blood, with multiple stab wounds. Blood splatters were everywhere, on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack on the victim. Forensic experts counted 11 stab wounds on the deceased's body, most of which were concentrated on the upper torso and hands, which she had used to shield her face. It seemed that Esteban had attacked her from behind, catching her by surprise. This was evident from the 3 wounds in the neck and shoulder area from behind. Maria likely tried to escape, but her husband caught up with her and continued to stab her in the chest, head, and hands. Her body was found lying on its back, with the final stab wounds inflicted near the heart. Search for the criminal and the abducted child. There was no doubt about who had dealt with the unfortunate woman, but where was the criminal, and where did he take the child? A few hours later, Esteban's abandoned car was found on the side of a deserted road. Inside were traces of blood, and on the floor lay the weapon used in the crime, bearing the man's fingerprints. For obvious reasons, the criminal decided to get rid of the car, which had been declared wanted. He could have hitchhiked, taken a bus, or stolen another car. However, the options of public transport and hitchhiking were quickly dismissed because the man was in bloody clothes, which would have undoubtedly raised questions or suspicions. Most likely, he stole a vehicle to escape. An emergency manhunt was launched, as the police had strong reasons to believe that the criminal would attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua with the child within hours. Alerts with photos of Esteban and his young son were sent to all border checkpoints, and by evening, the fugitive was apprehended. The criminal had even managed to find a clean shirt somewhere, but bloodstains from the victim remained on his jeans and sneakers. As expected, he tried to leave the country in a stolen vehicle with his young son in the car, but he was arrested at passport control. The man did not resist and immediately asked for a lawyer. A gun belonging to Esteban, with his fingerprints, was also found in the stolen vehicle. Crime investigation. The crime was initially classified as femicide, a crime against a woman due to her gender, which is considered a particularly serious offense in Latin American countries and is usually punished with life imprisonment. All the evidence pointed to Esteban: the bloody knife with his fingerprints, the blood stains on his clothes, and the neighbors' testimonies confirming that besides him, Maria, and the child, no one else was in the house. Moreover, the investigation revealed that the man had previously been charged multiple times for assaults and causing bodily harm. However, the only eyewitness to the crime was a 2.5-year-old boy. So, the criminal and his lawyers adopted a specific strategy. Esteban claimed that Maria had attacked him, and he was only defending himself from an enraged woman, panicking and grabbing the knife. The man argued that he didn't even remember how he inflicted the wounds and only realized what had happened when his wife fell silent. At the same time, The Vargas family tried to tarnish the deceased's reputation, calling her a bad mother, a terrible wife, a troublemaker, and unfaithful. The defendant's relatives claimed that Maria provoked Esteban, attacked him, and this ultimately led to the tragedy. They did everything to portray the criminal as a victim of circumstances. The lawyers insisted that the greedy Quesada family intended to take all his property and deprive him of the chance to see his son. During the investigation, it was even necessary to exhume the body of the victim, who had been buried a week after the crime. Independent experts refuted Esteban's and his defense's claims that Maria had attacked him first, once again confirming that the first 3 blows were inflicted on her from behind. Trial and sentence. The trial of the criminal began only in March 2023, meaning the defendant and his lawyers had plenty of time to build a convincing defense. However, various activist organizations fighting for women's rights supported the Quesada family, joined by crowds of people demanding just punishment for the criminal. The deceased's eldest son, who was 9 years old at the time, could testify in court and spoke about the stepfather's cruel treatment of his mother. The younger child, who witnessed the crime, was only 2.5 years old at the time. Psychologists worked with him and determined that the boy had a deep-seated fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. The child mentioned that his father had hurt his mother and that everything turned red. These materials were submitted to the court, but the child was not brought into the courtroom to avoid further trauma. Numerous witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances, testified against Esteban, recalling how he had shown aggression toward his wife at various times. Dozens of people had also regularly seen bruises and contusions on the young woman's body, and shortly before the start of the divorce proceedings, the police had documented signs of beatings. On May 15, 2023, Esteban Rivera Vargas was found guilty of the premeditated crime against his wife and sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison. Custody of the deceased woman's 2 children was granted to her relatives. Is it possible to steal a twin's identity and live their life? Twins are almost always of keen interest to others when they appear somewhere together. Not surprisingly, they have also always been the subject of intense scrutiny for scientific research as well. Such research is considered key in studying the genetics of their behavior from biology to psychology. Many twins claim to feel the mood, condition, and sometimes even physical pain of their brother or sister, even when they are far away. Sometimes they even repeat the fate of each other. A special connection have identical twins because they appear as a result of division of one fertilized egg. They not only have a strong external resemblance, but even their fingerprints are very similar in the type of pattern and the number of lines, although the detailed pattern, of course, differs. The story of twin sisters Sunny and Gina Khan looks like a script for a thriller or even a horror movie, except that it happened in real life. The girls were separated in early childhood, and later they were reunited. But instead of joy, they were seized by a strange feeling that grew into envy and constant rivalry in everything. Each of the girls considered her sister to be more successful and lucky, and the constant striving to be better at any cost resulted in a real tragedy. Sisters Sunny and Gina Han. April 30th, 1974, in a simple family living in one of the provinces of South Korea, were born twin daughters who were given the names Sunny and Gina. Spouses Han lived modestly, if not to say poorly, and the appearance of their 2 children seriously undermined the family budget. Parents constantly scandalized, and when the girls were not yet 2 years old, decided to separate. In this case, the children during the divorce process, they simply shared. Father took Gina and went to a neighboring city, and the mother with Sunny remained in her native province. The former spouses did not communicate for almost 4 years, and all this time the sisters also did not see each other. However, in 1980, Mr. Khan met with a woman who decided to marry and create a family, but his new lover immediately disliked Gina. The woman put the question on the edge and forced the man to return the child to his mother, agreeing to become his wife only in this case. In the fall of the same year, he brought the girl to his ex-wife and just left her there without going into explanations and without even paying attention to the situation in the house. Then he left, and never took any further interest in the fate of his children, nor did he help them financially. The mother of the girls by that time had serious problems with alcohol, had no stable job, and was addicted to gambling, which caused her to incur huge debts. The woman could leave home for days at a time, leaving her daughters alone with a pack of cheap convenience foods, or even no food at all. They were hungry, afraid, and seemed to have no one else in the world but each other. Nevertheless, the sisters' relationship was rapidly deteriorating. They began to fight over literally everything, and constantly competed for their mother's attention. Often their quarrels ended in fierce fights with bruises, abrasions, and torn pieces of hair. The mother never separated her daughters or tried to reconcile them. As she herself said in an interview many years later, fights between siblings were considered normal in Korea, so she did not intervene. Escape to the United States of America. In the early 1980s, Mrs. Han, unable to pay off her mounting debts and fearing for her life and the safety of her girls, decided to flee the country to the ocean to escape creditors and try to make a fresh start. The woman wanted to go to the sunny state of California, which she had only seen in pictures and magazines. She packed only the bare necessities in her suitcase and bought one-way tickets for herself and her children. They settled in Irvine, a city in Orange County, California, and immediately faced a host of problems. They had no friends, acquaintances, or relatives to help them in any way. Mrs. Han did not know English, and therefore could not get a job, and the girls, without knowledge of the language, had a very difficult time in school. The family was barely making ends meet, living on a meager allowance, and the future seemed ghostly and frightening. It took several years for the mother and children to adapt to the new place, but when life seemed to be getting better, the woman became addicted to alcohol and gambling again. The situation repeated itself, but now she also began to show mental disorders. She was unable to raise her own daughters and wanted to put them in an orphanage or foster home. In 1986, Mrs. Han's sister moved to California with her husband. The couple had no children of their own, and after learning about the situation in the family of a relative, she herself offered her to take the 12-year-old girls to her for upbringing. Mrs. Han accepted the offer gladly, but did not even talk to her daughters about it. She quickly packed their belongings in a suitcase, took a bus to Sunny and Gina in a neighboring town, and simply dropped them off at the bus stop at her sister's house, telling them where to go. The girls were confused, scared, but they were welcomed with open arms at their aunt's house, and soon their lives began to resemble a fairy tale. Auntie and her husband did everything they could to make the sisters feel comfortable and in need of nothing. Sunny and Gina ate enough for the first time in their lives, wore beautiful new clothes, and attended a prestigious school where they were taken by car. Nevertheless, not only did the relationship between the sisters not improve, but it escalated to the breaking point. They studied together in the same class and constantly competed in everything. The girls were the best students, and each of them tried to bypass her sister in this. They also played sports, trying to perform better than their sister, shared friends, competed for the attention of teachers and guardians, and liked boys. This rivalry seemed to really stimulate and spur the sisters on, pushing them to be the best at everything. They did become the best students in their school, showed high performance in sports, were meticulous about their appearance, and were an example to others. The only thing that never happened between them was love. Each of the sisters thought that the second sister got the best, so she did not want to fall behind and give in. It should be noted that Sunny was more open, friendly, and communicative, so it was easier for her to make friends or relationships with boys. Teachers treated her better, and guardians, without realizing it, showed more tenderness and care to her. But Gina seemed to be driven by anger and hatred. She would go out of her way to beat her sister and prove to everyone that she was better, from the army to the alcoholic to the gambler. After high school, the sisters' paths diverged. Gina decided that she could realize herself as a soldier and signed a 4-year contract, joining the U.S. Air Force. The girl was hardy, well-prepared physically, but she soon realized that the military service she did not like at all. Here reigned strict discipline and order. Orders were not discussed, and the soldier did not actually belong to himself. After a year, she made her first attempt to break the contract, but she failed. After another 6 months, she went on a deception, saying that her father was seriously ill and she needed to take care of him. The management demanded proof in the form of a medical certificate, which of course she could not get anywhere. So, another 6 months or so passed, and Gina was literally suffocating without any personal freedom. Her unit was transferred to Lackland Air Force Base, located in Bexar County, Texas. It is the only place for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force enlisted for basic military training. In addition, Lackland is best known as the only military training location for the U.S. Air Force. Many people dream of going here, but for Han, this base seemed like a real prison. Gina didn't want to wait another 2 years for her contract to expire, so she decided to cheat again. She went to a senior officer and informed him about her unconventional orientation. It should be noted that it was 1994, and at that time, such a scandalous statement was a good reason for immediate termination of the contract. Freed from her obligations, Gina returned back to California and settled in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Pretty 20-year-old girl quickly found a job in one of the popular casinos with a salary of about $20,000 a year. The sum was small even for that time, but tips sometimes exceeded her daily earnings several times over. For a while, it seemed that Gina's life was getting better. She was making good money, could afford to buy clothes and cosmetics in brand-name stores, rented a place in a good neighborhood, and had her own, albeit used, car. But that didn't last long. Soon, she became addicted to hot drinks and began to use them almost daily. But that wasn't the worst of it. One day, Khan, after a work shift, after picking up her paycheck and receiving a decent amount as a tip, decided to try her luck and sat down at a slot machine. Within a couple of hours, she lost all the money she had earned. But instead of regret, she woke up a real painful excitement. She wanted to win back and hit the jackpot. Every day, after the end of the shift, she drank and sat down at the machines where she lost all the money. At first, she gambled only her paycheck and tips, but soon she began borrowing money from colleagues and friends, which caused her to get into debt. Gina did not realize that she was repeating the fate of her mother, who also had a problem with alcohol and gambling, and for this reason, the woman once left her native country, fleeing to America with 2 children in her arms. Gina's addictions worsened. Soon she stopped lending money because she simply did not pay them back, and she descended into banal theft. For the first time, she stole cash from the purse of her colleague, but the latter, having discovered the loss, felt sorry for Han and did not report her to the police. When the situation was repeated, the thief was brought to administrative responsibility, but she got off with only a fine and a suspended sentence. A few months later, she stole her aunt who raised her, visiting her. In mid-1995, Gina was convicted of theft and for the first time received a real sentence, going to prison for 3 months, but got out early after less than a month. After that, she was in the sight of the police a couple more times for drunken debauchery, but spent no more than a few days behind bars. Successful twin. Sunny went to college after high school and then became a student at a prestigious university. She studied law, received a scholarship, made a lot of successful and wealthy friends, revolved in high society circles, and lived that annoyingly perfect life, which these days brag on social networks. She rented a spacious apartment in a luxury apartment complex with its own swimming pool and gym, located in an upscale neighborhood. Sunny shared the rent with her close friend and fellow student Helena Smith, who was the heiress of very wealthy parents. Han had her own expensive white BMW car, and she was dating a handsome and promising young man from an intelligent family who was studying at medical school and dreamed of a career as a surgeon. It seemed that she was the complete opposite of her sister, achieved everything she dreamed of, and a long and happy life was ahead of her. About her twin sister Sunny almost did not remember. They have not seen and did not communicate since graduation from high school. She knew from her aunt's words that Gina had already been in jail a couple of times for theft, had problems with alcohol, and got into debt because of gambling. The girl was too busy with her studies, relationships, and building her perfect life. She did not try to find her sister, somehow contact her, and offer help. However, in early 1996, Gina unexpectedly contacted her sister and asked for help. Is it possible to misappropriate someone else's life? In April 1996, Gina called Sunny and asked to see her. The sisters saw each other for the first time in 4 years, but did not feel any joy about it. They sat across from each other in a cafe, and the people around them did not take their eyes off them, because it seemed like one person sitting in front of a mirror. Gina complained to her sister that she was in serious trouble and didn't know what to do. Gina was unemployed, but with a lot of debt. She had nowhere to live and no one to turn to. Sunny listened carefully to her sister and genuinely felt sorry for her. She suggested that Gina stay in her apartment for the time being, without even consulting Helena. The same day, Gina moved into her sister's apartment with only a bag and her belongings. Of course, Gina had heard that Sunny was not poor, but she had not expected to see such a luxurious and cozy apartment in a comfortable residential complex, where there was everything one could dream of. Naturally, Gina did not pay for the apartment, and for more than a month she simply lived at her sister's expense. Every day she was more and more eaten up by envy and hatred. She constantly thought about how her life could have turned out. How was her sister better than her? At this time, Gina had a seemingly crazy thought. After all, she and Sunny were identical in appearance, and no one but her mother and aunt had ever distinguished them. Gina wondered, what if the twin just disappeared, and she could live her perfect life? In her opinion, no one would even notice the switch, as well as the disappearance of Gina herself, who had almost no friends, and her relatives frankly disliked her. Soon, such thoughts turned into an obsession. Gradually, an insidious plan matured in Gina's mind. She carefully watched with whom her sister communicates, where she goes, how she speaks and dresses, exactly copied her hair, makeup, and demeanor. Gina tried to socialize with her sister's friends as much as possible to learn more about them so they wouldn't notice the switch. The sisters still did not find common ground and constantly quarreled. As the main argument, Sunny threatened to evict her sister every time, but since she had nowhere else to go, she just gave up and stored up her hatred. On August 18, 1996, after another scandal, Gina had been drinking, and while her sister and a neighbor went somewhere else, she went through the apartment and, taking all the cash found there, went to the casino. When Sunny and Helena returned home, they found the place a mess and the money missing. They immediately realized what had happened and went to the police, because they could no longer tolerate the antics of Gina. The girl was arrested the same night right in the casino. She was found guilty and sent to prison for 6 months, but after 2 months, the conditions of her imprisonment were relaxed, and the convict could leave the prison for 6 hours a day to go to work, but had to return to the prison at night. She complied for 2 weeks, and then decided to escape to complete her plan, an insidious plot. Once free, Gina hitchhiked back to Orange County. She was not a dangerous criminal, so the search for her was not a full-time endeavor. Since Gina had no money, she was forced to spend the night in a homeless shelter in a very disadvantaged neighborhood. She wanted to kill her sister as soon as possible and take her place, but she couldn't do it alone, and it was impossible to hire a hitman on credit. Then Gina recruited 2 local teenagers, whom she met in the same troubled neighborhood. They turned out to be Archie Bryant and his buddy Joni Syrat. The girl promised to pay each of them $100 in case of success. The guys prepared for the crime thoroughly, bought rope, duct tape, and even somewhere got a gun, which however was not loaded, but could be used for intimidation. On November 15, 1996, Gina, having borrowed money from acquaintances, rented a used Ford Mustang, on which she and her accomplices were to go to her sister's house. All was to happen on Wednesday, November 20th in the afternoon, when Sunny, according to the calculations of her sister, would definitely be home alone. And to make a reconnaissance, and to make sure of it, the intruders bought a pack of magazines, so that Johnny, under the guise of a salesman, would look into the apartment and check who was inside. The plan seemed flawless, the roles were written, and each of the criminal trio knew what he had to do. But suddenly everything went wrong, as they had originally intended. A failed assassination attempt. On the appointed day, around noon, a Mustang pulled up to the apartment complex where Sunny lived and 2 guys got out. Archie stealthily stood aside while Johnny went with the magazines to the victim's apartment. He knocked, and the door was opened by Sunny, who, however, did not bother to knock, and saying she didn't want anything, simply slammed the door in his face. Johnny went back to his assistants, told them everything, and they discussed the details of the plan once more. Somehow, no one had any doubts that the girl might not have been home alone, only because she had opened the door herself without calling anyone. Having finished discussing the nuances, the young men took the rope, duct tape, and gun from the car and went back to the apartment. Around 1 o'clock, Johnny called the apartment again, and Archie stood a little ways away, preparing to kick the door down as soon as Sunny opened it. By then, however, Sunny had gone to take a shower because she was about to leave for an important meeting. Her neighbor was sitting in the living room in front of the TV, and when she heard the bell ring, she didn't even want to open the door. But the unexpected visitor was persistent, so after a couple minutes, Smith gave up and headed for the door. As soon as the lock clicked and the door began to open, the guys, without ceremony, kicked it out, knocked the girl to the floor, and only then realized that it was not Sunny in front of them. Threatening with a gun, they tied Helena up, duct taped her mouth shut, and then Johnny ran to Gina to ask her how to handle the situation and whether to let the witness live. He took with him a bank card lying on the dresser in Sunny's name. At this time, Sunny, still in the bathroom, heard a noise and cautiously peeked out. She decided that burglars had broken into the house, grabbed the cell phone in the hallway, and went back into the bathroom and started calling the emergency services. All she had time to do was give the address and tell them about the armed robbery when the connection was suddenly cut off, and the door to the room swung open with a powerful kick. Archie pulled a terrified Sunny out by the hair, tied her up with rope, taped her mouth shut, and threw her on the floor next to a bound Helena. The friends expected to be tortured to find out where the money and valuables were in the house, or to be abused, but just a few minutes later the police arrived. Johnny and Gina were still in the Mustang when the police arrived at the house. First, 3 law enforcement officers ran past them, and a few minutes later another car came to help. Since it was a hostage situation, all forces were rushed to the call. A police officer who was running by was radioed the number of the apartment, and this was heard by the intruders sitting in the car. Gina got out of the car and yelled that she was Sunny Hahn. The law enforcer looked at her but didn't understand what that said. He asked her to wait and ran to the scene, where his colleagues had already managed to disarm the attacker and rescue the hostages. When the police officer entered the apartment, he was shocked and bewildered. In front of him, frightened and crying, sat the same girl he had just run past on the street. He asked her name, and when she said her name was Sunny Khan, the police officer doubted for a moment that what was happening was real. He thought he was going crazy, because the same person could not be in 2 places at the same time. The man, telling his colleague that he needed to check something, jumped back into the yard, but the Ford Mustang with the girl and her accomplice had already disappeared. The good twin and the bad twin? When Gina saw the police arriving and heard the apartment number being called on the radio, she realized that the attempt had failed. Then she took a desperate step, jumping out of the car and identifying herself by her sister's name. The girl wanted to make herself look like a victim, saying that the real criminal is now in her apartment, but the hurried officer simply did not listen to her and only asked to wait. Naturally, Gina did not wait. She and Johnny went to the nearest ATM, where they were able to withdraw a few $1,000s from her sister's stolen card. And then the criminals rushed towards the Mexican border, but first, they needed to change their car for something less conspicuous. At the car dealership, Gina introduced herself with her sister's name, but when filling out the paperwork, she made the mistake of writing her real name. The employees thought this was very strange and asked her to wait for a while to settle the formalities, then informed the management, and they called the police. When arrested, Gina continued to insist that Sunny was her, and the other sister was pretending to be her. The identity of each of the girls was established only by fingerprints, but even after that, at the investigation and in the courtroom, they both continued to introduce themselves as Sunny Khan. At first glance, the Khan sisters seemed to be typical good and bad twins, but a deeper examination of their history revealed that this was not the case at all. While Gina suffered from addictions, regularly got into trouble, and had several criminal records, Sunny built a happy and successful life. However, after the sisters' paths diverged, and they stopped constantly competing with each other, Sunny lost her main incentive. She entered a prestigious university, but in the second year of her academic performance began to fall, and the girl lost her scholarship. To be able to pay for her studies, She got a job as a dancer in one of the nightclubs in the neighboring city and carefully hid it from her friends and boyfriend. Sunny tried to maintain a picture of an ideal life, which in reality she was no longer living. Trial and sentencing. Gina and her minor accomplices were charged with conspiracy to murder Sunny Khan. The girl was also accused of trying to take the identity of her twin sister, whose name she introduced herself even during the hearing. In general, watching the process was curious and creepy at the same time, because the sisters, being on the same emotional wave, simultaneously began to cry, experienced panic attacks, and at one of the sessions simultaneously lost consciousness. Gina claimed she didn't intend to kill her sister at all, but only wanted to get her belongings out of her apartment. Archie and Johnny were supposed to help her with that, but the guys decided to play gangsters and scare Sunny and her neighbor, but a little too much. The defendants pointed out that the gun was not loaded, so no real harm would have been done to the girls. On November 20th, 1997, a year after the attempted murder, the court reached its verdict. The jury took into account that Gina was previously convicted multiple times, escaped from prison, and at the time of this crime was wanted. Taking all of this into account, Gina Khan was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 26 years in prison. Her accomplices Archie Bryant and Jonia Sairat received 14 and 8 years respectively, the aftermath and cultural reflection of the case. In May 2018, a California state commission granted Gina's attorney's petition, and she was released after serving 21 years. It is worth noting that she received support from Sunny in the matter of parole, because her sister was able to forgive her. Once free, Gina moved into the house of her elderly mother, whom she now takes care of. The story of the Khan sisters was widely covered in the press, became a topic for numerous issues of popular talk shows, and also formed the basis of a number of documentaries and feature films. It's often said that life really begins after 40. A wealth of life experience contributes to this. For some, maturity marks a period of gaining self-confidence because not everyone has lived their life the way they wanted. For example, some people didn't know themselves or their true desires, so they followed others' advice instead. Or they might have chosen the wrong life partner. A fear of social judgment often led to taking the path of least resistance. Sometimes with age and the realization that half of one's life has passed, comes the liberation from old fears and complexes. For such individuals, turning 40 is a sort of blossoming. Once the kids are grown, they can spend more time on themselves, leave past relationships behind, and try to start new ones. Chaman Starbuck, a 42-year-old woman in our story today, believed this as well. But her new hopes did not come to fruition. On December 3, 2011, Chanine was found on the bedroom floor of her own home. She was lying on her back in a provocative pose. On her stomach was an erotic massager. It was clear that someone wanted to posthumously disgrace her. There was no doubt among the police that she had been criminally taken from life. Her body bore bruises and scrapes everywhere. Later, a medical examiner reported that some injuries were caused by the use of a stun gun. Other evidence suggested her body had been moved. However, the cause of Chamin's demise was strangulation. Detectives faced a tough task. They needed to establish the last hours of this mother of five's life and find the criminal. The disappearance of a mother of many. The police learned of the woman's lack of contact a day before the grim discovery. Initially, her ex-husband, Clay Starbuck, raised the alarm. The 47-year-old man reported he had been unable to contact his wife since December 1st. Around 3 p.m., Chamin texted her daughter that she was unable to pick up the kids from school due to feeling unwell and asked to wait for their father, whom she supposedly had informed of the change in plans. However, his phone was off, so he was unaware of the situation. Marshall and Serena, the younger brother and sister, were tired and hungry. Therefore, the 15-year-old Logan decided to call her older brother. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, located a couple of blocks from their home. Upon arrival, Austin reported that he too could not get in touch with their mother. Perhaps she had turned off her phone to rest and recover. The boy put the kids in the car and drove them to Clay's house. The man was not expecting them, but was genuinely pleased by the unexpected circumstances. After the divorce, the older children had stayed with him, and the three youngest with their mother. Therefore, the father decided to enjoy their company and did not disturb Shannon. Moreover, such incidents had happened before with her. Besides, he expected to see his former wife at the school basketball game that evening, but she never showed up. On December 2nd, Mr. Starbuck drove the children to school and headed to his ex-wife's home. The front door was locked, and the blinds were drawn. Since he didn't have a spare key, he tried to enter, but was unsuccessful. Clay then sent a message stating that if Janine did not show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the law enforcement. After waiting until the agreed time, he went to the police and explained the situation. 2 sheriff's deputies went to the provided address, but, finding nothing suspicious, returned. The officers suggested waiting another day. If she didn't make contact by then, he should come back. Disappointed, Clay went home and waited for news. The next day, he went to the station again. Unexpectedly, they told him that his wasn't the only report. A friend and Shaman's mother had also been unable to reach her. This was uncharacteristic of her. This time, the police approached the case more responsibly. 48 hours had passed since Mrs. Starbuck's disappearance, and several people were concerned. After obtaining the necessary permission, the police went to her home again. What secrets did Mrs. Starbuck's home hold? Upon arriving at the residence, officers broke the lock and entered. There were no signs of a break-in or robbery. At first glance, everything was in its place. However, the idyll was disrupted as soon as they entered the woman's bedroom. That's where the grim truth was revealed. Shaman Starbuck hadn't just disappeared, she had been brutally ended. It appeared she had just gotten up. Her bed was unmade, the blanket lay nearby, the sheet was missing from the bed, and the mattress cover was stained red. The deceased's cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts focused their attention on her room. They examined all available surfaces for fingerprints. Some had been wiped clean, but 12 latent prints were found on the massager's box and the bathroom mirror. Numerous traces were also found in common areas. For further DNA analysis, specialists took scrapings from under the nails, face, and neck of the body. Detectives suspected that the homeowner had been deprived of life after she got out of the shower, was then moved to the bed, and eventually dragged to the floor. Notably, the removed sheets were found in the washing machine. Perhaps the perpetrator wanted to remove evidence in this way. Clay sheds light on his ex-wife's lifestyle. By noon, Clay arrived at Shaman's house. He was eager to find out what had happened. The scene in his ex-wife's yard did not inspire positive thoughts. The perimeter of the building was cordoned off with yellow tape, and an ambulance and several police cars were parked near the lawn. Mr. Starbuck was the first to be informed of the woman's tragic end. The detectives needed to gather any information about the victim and her lifestyle. Therefore, after the ex-husband managed to calm down a bit, they questioned him. He explained that they had an arrangement. Every morning he picked up the younger kids and took them to school, and she picked them up after school. However, this routine was sometimes disrupted. That happened on the morning of December 1st, when his car broke down a couple of blocks from home. Usually, waking up early, he would drive around the neighborhood and warm up the car. That time, Clay texted Shaman and asked her to take the kids to school. He then went home to wait for it to warm up. Around 11 a.m., he tried to start the car again, but once more, it wouldn't start. Giving up, he went back inside to nap. Mr. Starbuck didn't notice as he slept for several hours. During that time, his cell phone died. To substantiate his claims, he showed the correspondence with his ex-wife. At first glance, everything added up. Moreover, Clay was very cooperative, handing over his cell phone, DNA material, and fingerprints. He also confessed that he had been worried about Shaman because the divorce had changed her and made her more vulnerable. When officers asked him to elaborate, he shared that, being single, the woman had registered on a dating site. As she remained attractive, she had a wide circle of admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing some of them simultaneously. Following his logic, one of these lovers might have sent Jimin to the afterlife. Unfortunately, he couldn't name anyone, as he didn't have such information. Throughout the conversation, Starbuck desperately cried. He explained that it was difficult for him to accept the fact of his former lover's death and to speak of her in the past tense. After recording his statement, the officers sent the man home. Poor guy had to tell the children about their mother's death. Beginning of the investigation. The case involving Channing Starbuck's demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Starbuck family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy confirmed a chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun and also revealed that she had 10 broken ribs. The injuries inflicted upon her head and body were severe and likely caused by a blunt object. The external appearance of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death. The expert estimated that her life was ended sometime between December 1st and 2. Scratches on her body suggested she had been moved. Because her neck bone was broken, the medical examiner stated that something soft was used during the act of strangulation, possibly a hand, a towel, or even a sheet. A slight clarity in the case emerged from the body samples taken, including male DNA, suggesting that the suspect might be among her close male acquaintances, starting from her ex-husband to secret admirers. Channing's darker side. Hoping to catch his former wife's perpetrator quickly, Clay Starbuck cooperated fully with the investigation. He underwent an examination during which he agreed to document any injuries and damages. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might also have sustained injuries during the struggle. However, no such injuries were found on Clay's hands. Following him, the 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake were also examined. Questions arose only regarding the older son, whose hands bore old cuts, but these were attributed to his job in a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the children, some facts were established that were later clarified. Many of them knew that after the divorce, their mother often went on dates with men and did not approve of it. The teenagers had even seen explicit photos on her laptop, which led them to speculate that she might have been targeted by a predator operating online. It was clear that everyone loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her departure. However, they disagreed with the changes in her life. In a follow-up interview, Clay was more articulate. He blamed Channing for the family discord. While he was away on business trips, she frequently saw other men. He even admitted that he suspected that Marshall might not be his son. Nevertheless, he loved him as his own. In his view, after their relationship ended, Channing started to indulge excessively and not appropriate for her age. He disapproved of how she would drop the kids off at his place when going on another date, among other things. However, by this point, the investigators had managed not only to talk to him and the children. Having interviewed Channing's relatives and some friends, the detectives formed their own picture of the deceased and her family. The rise and fall of the Starbuck family. Channing was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana. She was the youngest in her family, spending her childhood with 2 brothers. Over time, her parents divorced and started new families, giving her additional siblings. From a young age, Channing dreamt of creating a large and loving family of her own, a vision strengthened by her active participation in church and deep faith. She grew up modest and kind-hearted, with a passion for drawing, which earned her numerous awards and prizes. At the age of 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck. Their paths crossed in Florida, where Shannon had moved with her family in her youth. Clay, originally from Alaska, was vacationing in one of the warmer states. They met at a party hosted by mutual friends and immediately took to each other. That evening, Shannon learned a lot about Clay, including that he had continued his education at a school for diesel mechanics in Colorado after high school, then returned home to work on the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, making a good living. However, she discovered he was already married and had 2 beautiful children from that union. Chanin was not deterred by his complicated past. In fact, she saw it as a positive, believing that it gave him valuable experience for married life. The couple married soon after. The newly minted Mrs. Starbuck moved in with her husband, initially struggling to adapt to the new environment and weather, but quickly settling in. However, married life wasn't as idyllic as Chanin had hoped, with Clay often away, leaving her to manage the household alone. Yet love gave her strength, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end, and he would be back by her side. Meanwhile, she embraced motherhood with his children from his first marriage. It wasn't long before they had their own children together, first a son named Austin, and 3 years later, a brother for him named Blake. In 1996, their family grew again with the birth of a much-awaited daughter, Logan. But with Logan came challenges. She was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at a young age. Chanin embraced her daughter's diagnosis with grace and became her best friend. Later, another daughter brightened the Starbucks life, whom Clay named Serena. Chanin devoted her time to her children, overseeing their health, education, and church teachings. She was known throughout the community for her hobbies, cooking, and crafts. Yet, she was so immersed in her role as a caring mother and loving wife that she didn't notice when her husband began an affair at work. This was a tremendous shock to her, perceived as a deep betrayal. Consequently, in 2000, she filed for divorce, marking a new chapter in her life. Still harboring feelings for her ex-husband, she decided to move to Arizona to dull the pain of their painful separation by starting a relationship with another man. However, this attempt failed as Chanin realized she still loved Clay, who was also reaching out, asking her to return. Convinced he had repented, she gave him a second chance. In 2001, the couple welcomed their son Marshall, their 5th child. Yet, instead of solidifying their marriage, he became a new point of contention. Even a formal remarriage in 2006 could not save their fractured relationship. Awakening. 6 months later, they moved to Deer Park in Spokane County, Washington. Clay found a suitable house for their large family. He continued to work at his previous job, so he was away most of the time. Chanin, left to manage the household and kids on her own, took them to movies, theaters, and parks, and organized home parties. However, doubts and distrust poisoned their marriage, further impacted by the long separations and breaks in their relationship. Ultimately, in 2010, the couple permanently separated. Crossing into her 40s, Chanin began to rebuild her life, holding on to hope that she might still experience the joy of love. She resolved never to give up or repeat past mistakes. Even when Clay suffered a serious injury, she chose not to return to him. Nonetheless, she supported her ex-husband and provided whatever help she could. In February 2011, Clay left his job and settled permanently in Deer Park, staying close not just to his children, but to Chanin as well. He still hoped she would return, but she did not share his view, and finally finding freedom, she enjoyed it. After undergoing surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with their father, happy to be away from under their mother's constant supervision. Shannon, breathing new life, found a part-time job and enrolled in a dental assistant course. Tired of being a housewife and needing to support her family, especially as her ex-husband stopped paying child support due to his illness, she still had him nearby for emergencies. The children stayed with him after school every Wednesday, as well as the second and fourth weekends of the month. That summer, Chanin proudly received her certification, marking off one dream and starting to pursue another. Hoping to meet a worthy man, she created a profile on a dating site, feeling a keen need to live for herself. She also regretted spending her best years on a man who did not appreciate her and was capable of deceit. However, a criminal plan one December morning ended her dreams. Chanin Starbuck's funeral took place on December 10, 2011. The large number of people who came to the service testified to her being a bright and sincere person. She found her final resting place at a cemetery in Orlando. Search for the culprit. Public attention to the woman's death spurred law enforcement to move quickly. While focusing on her ex-husband, detectives decided to verify his alibi. As a result, they retraced Clay's movements on December 1st. He once again explained what had happened that morning and detailed where and how his car had broken down. Additionally, the results of the initial examination came in. Starbuck's fingerprints did not match any found at the crime scene. This led to a decision to check him against existing databases while also focusing on Chanin's mobile phone, laptop, and personal diary. At the same time, they explored the possibility of other people being involved in the crime. After carefully examining Mrs. Starbuck's mobile phone, detectives added several names to the list of suspects. Men she had communicated with on the dating site raised suspicions. One, Tom Walker, had scheduled a date with her on December 5th. Hours before her demise, they had candid conversations and exchanged photos. Tom had asked Chanin to take a photo using an adult toy, which she refused. Notably, her body was later found in the exact pose mentioned by Tom. Within an hour, Walker was located. He was shocked not only by the news, but also by being considered a suspect. He immediately explained his activities on the day of her death, which were confirmed by colleagues and surveillance cameras. Next on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Chanin on December 1st. From their correspondence, it was clear he was not looking for a serious relationship. Their interaction was merely casual. It also turned out that the suitor had used a fake name. His real name was John Kenlane. He worked in a completely different field than he had claimed and was married, hence the secrecy. On the day of the crime, Chanin postponed their morning meeting to a later time, citing headaches. Eventually, the date did not take place. After taking a DNA sample from him, he was released. His alibi was corroborated, even as his deception was revealed to his family. Critical evidence. After these developments, the investigation reverted to square one. While examining Chanin's mobile phone, detectives made a request to the cellular service provider, uncovering another significant detail. It turned out that a 911 call was made from the victim's phone at 9:18 a.m. on the morning of December 1st, but the suspect deleted it from the call log. Thanks to a request to the emergency services, the 30-second call was retrieved. Unfortunately, it contained nothing but sobs and rustling sounds before abruptly cutting off. It was also discovered that after the failed call, the call center operator tried to return the call, but it went to voicemail. According to GPS data, Chanin's mobile device was located at her home, pinpointing the exact date of her demise. She had been deprived of life after dropping her kids at school and returning home. This meant that the 11 messages sent afterward were not sent by her. The suspect tried to confuse the investigation. Moreover, he was close to the Starbuck family, as he used a nickname for the youngest son, calling him Marsh in the correspondence. After this information, Clay's statements underwent further scrutiny. He had sufficient motive for ending his ex-wife's life, divorce. Not all partners accept new realities with dignity. Moreover, he had a perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. Thus, authorities decided to again track the suspect's car route, this time using street surveillance camera recordings. This is where officers' suspicions took shape. Starbuck's car had not broken down. Concurrently, results from another analysis arrived. DNA material collected from Chanin's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. Harsh reprisal. The scenario unfolded as follows. On the morning of December 1st, Clay sent a message to his ex-wife asking her to take the kids to school, fabricating a car breakdown. While she was out, he entered the house and waited. During this time, he accessed her unprotected laptop and found personal correspondences that infuriated the already jealous Starbuck. When Chanin returned, a heated argument ensued, which ultimately led to bloodshed. This explained the unusual pose in which the deceased was found, an act of vengeance for her newfound freedom. Afterward, Clay stayed in the house, impersonating her in text exchanges. His intentions to harm his ex-wife might have been long-standing. Now, A friend's words to detectives took on new meaning. During a conversation, she mentioned that Clay and Shannon's relationship was far from what it seemed. Shannon had confessed in candid conversations that she was tired of his constant control and criticisms. Daring to divorce, she feared he might harm her someday. From June to November 2011, she had repeatedly contacted the police, claiming her ex-husband was stalking her. She felt unsafe even in her own home, hence did not trust anyone with the keys. Ultimately, she managed to secure a restraining order against Clay, so their communications were confined to text messages. Careful examination of Mrs. Starbuck's diary made it evident that she not only feared her former lover, but believed he was turning the children against her. He concocted vile stories and portrayed her as promiscuous. Thus, the children's reaction to their father's arrest on February 6, 2012, was not surprising. They refused to believe in his involvement. They were not perturbed by the fact that a tracking program was found on their mother's laptop and a hard drive labeled Chamin's desktop computer in their father's house, along with printed correspondences. The older children doubted the authenticity of the DNA analysis, believing the accusation against their father was far-fetched and the case fabricated. However, the views of law enforcement and other relatives differed. Triumph of truth and justice. At the trial, the prosecution was confident in the man's guilt, supported by a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies. In June 2013, justice prevailed. Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Clay's attorney filed an appeal against the verdict, but it was rejected. To this day, the perpetrator remains behind bars at the Airway Heights Corrections Center in Spokane County. Shannon's relatives mourn the woman's untimely departure profoundly. Yet, their hearts are even more shattered by the thought that the children sided with their father. He was so obsessed with his ex-wife that in seeking revenge, he forgot about the consequences. Unable to accept his new reality, he left his children effectively orphaned. The insane courier of death. How quickly would you open your door if a stranger knocked? Would you inquire about their identity and purpose before unlocking? Most people would, as a reasonable precaution. However, if a courier in a uniform with a package in hand stood on your doorstep, would you still ask questions or would you open right away? Typically, couriers do not arouse suspicion or concern, and people tend to let them in, even when they aren't expecting any delivery. In the summer of 2020, amid the pandemic and total lockdown, when couriers became almost the sole link between people and the outside world, delivering everything from food and essential medicines to work documents, one such delivery person was bringing death to homes. A masked man with a pistol seemed elusive, and it was unclear who his next visit would target. The police, without any leads, were afraid to spread panic. But soon the case took a completely unexpected turn. A fatal incident involving a well-known lawyer. This convoluted story, as it later turned out, had begun many years ago, but its tragic development occurred on July 11th, 2020, in a prestigious cottage area southeast of Los Angeles. There, in one of the elite houses, renowned lawyer Mark Angelucci was waiting out the pandemic, isolated in his spacious mountain estate. Like many others, he continued to work remotely, hoping for the situation in the country and the world to improve. On that day, the 52-year-old homeowner wasn't expecting any visitors or deliveries, but when a courier in FedEx Corporation uniform rang his doorbell with a package in hand, the man, without hesitation, opened the door. The lawyer probably thought that one of his partners or clients had sent some important documents, forgetting to inform him. Nothing indicated trouble, and the person on the doorstep did not seem alarming or suspicious. The courier, appropriately wearing a special protective mask and gloves for that period, had a parcel and an invoice that required a signature. However, as soon as the lawyer was about to receive the package, the delivery person suddenly drew a pistol and fired several shots at close range, aiming for vital organs to ensure the lawyer would be fatally injured. The lawyer had no chance to react, and being unarmed in his home robe, he had no chance of survival. After the deed, the courier simply left the scene, leaving the victim bleeding out on the floor. Since the house was in a rather secluded location, none of the neighbors noticed anything unusual, though sounds resembling shots did prompt them to call emergency services and report the disturbing incident. No leads at all. Mark Angelucci succumbed to his injuries at the scene, and the arriving medics and law enforcement could only confirm he was dead. Upon examining the crime scene, detectives immediately dismissed the notion that robbery was the criminal's motive. The house was truly luxurious, adorned with antique items containing a safe and visibly expensive possessions, yet everything remained untouched. In the lawyer's home office lay a mass of important documents concerning various cases, but these too did not interest the perpetrator. Everything in the house was left undisturbed, nothing was searched or moved, and the criminal did not even cross the threshold of the home. Thus, from the very beginning, the main objective was clearly to eliminate the homeowner. The criminal was caught on several outdoor surveillance cameras, but as he was wearing a company cap from FedEx and a medical mask, it was virtually impossible to discern any distinctive features. All that could be determined was that he was a white male, of average height and slender build. The criminal wore gloves, thus leaving no fingerprints anywhere. Essentially, the only evidence consisted of bullets extracted from the deceased's body. The police were baffled, and initially they decided to investigate the people closest to the lawyer, to understand who might wish him harm and who might benefit from his death. The possibility that the crime was related to his professional activities was also not ruled out. Therefore, it was also necessary to examine which cases the lawyer had been handling recently, whether he had any dissatisfied clients, and whether he had conflicts with any colleagues. There was a vast amount of work to be done, and determining a priority direction seemed impossible at the moment. So they decided to start with the relatives and close friends of the lawyer. Rich, successful, and utterly alone. It soon emerged that Mark was profoundly lonely. No, he had quite a few friends, got along well with colleagues and neighbors, but he had no truly close or familial relationships. His parents had long passed away, Angelucci had no siblings, and he never started his own family. In his youth, the man diligently studied, then he tirelessly built a career in legal practice, where he achieved great heights and recognition. But he intentionally decided to sacrifice his personal life, so at 52, he had never been married and had no heirs. Mark was quite attractive, intelligent, eloquent, always dressed expensively and stylishly, lived in a luxurious home, and drove a luxury car. He was rich and successful, and wherever this man appeared, he literally drew the attention of women, but he did not engage in romances or intrigues, and in principle, always kept his personal life hidden from everyone. This led to many rumors about his orientation, but the lawyer himself never confirmed nor denied them. In his list of contacts, they found a woman named Cassie J., with whom the deceased was very close. Their relationship was not romantic, but rather akin to brotherly sisterly love. She was a journalist and had met the lawyer many years ago while preparing a report on a high-profile case he was handling. The man willingly agreed to help her. They quickly found common ground, got along well, and continued to communicate after their joint work ended. For Cassie, the news of the death of her close friend was a real shock. She described Mark as sincere, kind, and responsive, with an easygoing and cheerful nature, who was involved in charity and always responded to others' troubles. According to her, he had no enemies, at least she was unaware of their existence. But in recent years, he had been among the top lawyers in California and had not lost a single case, so he undoubtedly made some adversaries whom he might not even suspect. The anti-feminist and men's rights advocate. During the investigation, a rather intriguing detail emerged. It was discovered that the lawyer held anti-feminist views, but also supported traditional notions of men and women in family and society, without harboring any animosity towards women. He opposed discrimination against men in matters such as child custody, which almost always tend to favor women. Angelucci was a fighter for justice, not male supremacy. He took on some complex cases completely free of charge, helping those who found themselves in trouble. The lawyer noted that with the rise of feminist organization activity, men were almost always presumed guilty from the start in any conflict and doomed to defeat, with no chance to prove their innocence. Over the years, Mark became an activist for men's rights, although in fact, he simply sought to equalize rights for all people, ensuring that everyone could expect a fair judicial resolution in conflict situations regardless of gender. Given this, it was not possible to exclude the likelihood that radically minded representatives of feminist organizations could have been involved in the lawyer's demise, as the deceased had no family or close people, and there were no leads or clues in the case. The investigation could have stalled and eventually been archived. In response, Cassie J. decided to take initiative. Using her extensive connections in the media, the journalist brought widespread attention to the case, prompting law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the case files that the lawyer had been handling recently, hoping to find any hints. The task was daunting, but before they could find anything, the courier criminal struck again. Collateral victims, or was the entire family targeted? On July 19, 2020, just a week after the first crime, on the other side of the country in New Jersey, an armed courier paid a visit to the luxurious home of a state federal judge. That day, none of the family members were expecting any deliveries or packages, and they were all self-isolating. Both parents, being lawyers, continued to work remotely, and their college student son was on holiday. The head of the family, a 62-year-old lawyer named Mike Anderl, first noticed the approaching courier while he was on the second-floor balcony of his home. He thought that perhaps some work-related documents awaited his wife and hurried downstairs to open the door. However, his son, who was closer to the front door, opened it without a second thought. They exchanged just a few words before a shot rang out. Mike was descending the stairs at that time, and likely he was the initial target, but his 20-year-old son, Daniel, literally stood between his father and the criminal. The young man took a bullet to the chest, fell to the floor, and the criminal opened fire on the lawyer, wounding him 3 times. The courier, as in the previous case, did not enter the premises but simply turned around and left, leaving the bleeding victims to die. However, there was another person in the house, Judge Esther Salas, who was the wife and mother of the victims. The woman, shortly before the incident, had gone down to the basement to sort through things and did not hear the gunshots. When she came upstairs, she first saw her son lying in a pool of blood at the door. Esther rushed to him, tried to stem the wound, called out for her husband's help, and only then saw that a bloodied Mike was lying on the stairs. Salas immediately called emergency services, reporting the incident, and tried to provide aid to her husband and son herself. By the time law enforcement and paramedics arrived, both men were alive but in extremely critical condition. They were immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where they underwent surgery and, it seemed, their condition was stabilized. The criminal's motive was unclear, and it was also uncertain whether he came to end the life of the judge, her lawyer husband, a former prosecutor, or intended to eliminate the entire family. Again, no traces or clues were found at the scene, and the only evidence consisted of bullets fired at the victims. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, immediately suspecting a connection between this incident and the murder of Mark Angelucci in California. In both cases, the targets were lawyers, and the shooter disguised himself as a FedEx courier. However, the agents were confident that in the second case, the true target was the judge, and her relatives were merely collateral victims. Eyewitnesses' final account. Ballistic analysis established that the shooter used a .380 caliber pistol in both incidents, and all bullets were fired from the same weapon. This dispelled any remaining doubts that the acts were committed by the same individual. But who was this person? Where could he be found? And where, when, and to whom might he strike next? It was necessary to question the surviving witness who had come face to face with the criminal and had even exchanged a few words. After a serious surgery, Daniel was in the intensive care unit in critical condition, but when he regained consciousness, he expressed a desire to speak with detectives to tell them everything he had seen. The young man couldn't describe the perpetrator's appearance because he was masked, but he thought the individual was elderly, as he could see gray at the temples, wrinkles around the eyes, and the courier's hands appeared old. Behind the courier, near the road, Daniel noticed a light-colored car, though he couldn't remember the make. The student also speculated that the criminal's target might have been his mother, as the attacker had inquired if she was home. However, at that moment, his father appeared on the stairs, apparently startling the criminal. The attacker quickly drew his pistol, shot the young man in the chest, and then began shooting at Mike, wounding him 3 times. After being injured, Daniel remembered nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The student's testimony provided little help to the investigation except to confirm that the shooter was an older white male. Regrettably, Daniel's condition could not be stabilized. He worsened, and the day after speaking with law enforcement, the 20-year-old passed away in the hospital from a resultant internal bleeding. Who is Esther Salas? Thus, detectives unanimously concluded that the main target of the shooter was indeed Esther Salas, but her husband and son were inadvertently in the way, and now the young man was deceased, while his father still hovered between life and death. It was urgent to understand what linked Salas and the earlier deceased Angelucci, what cases they were handling, and if they had common adversaries. Esther Salas was born in 1968 in Monterey Park, California. She had Cuban roots on her mother's side and Mexican on her father's. The girl who grew up in poverty achieved everything in life through her intellect and hard work. She attended Rutgers University for law school and earned her Juris Doctor in 1994. She built a stellar career, progressing from a clerk to an assistant U.S. public defender and eventually to a United States magistrate judge in New Jersey. She also served several years as the president of the Hispanic Lawyers Association. Since 2011, she had been a judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey. In 1993, Esther married renowned lawyer Mike Andrill, who was 11 years her senior. The couple desperately dreamed of having a child, but Esther struggled to conceive. After 4 consecutive miscarriages, doctors declared that she would never have children. However, a miracle happened on July 13, 2000, when the couple's only child, a son named Daniel, was born. The spouses adored their child, raising him in an atmosphere of love and care, striving to provide him with the best education and wide opportunities in life. Unfortunately, just a week after the young man celebrated his 20th birthday, he was gone. An unexpected turn in the case. News about a courier criminal operating across the country went viral on the internet, spreading rapidly and sowing panic among the population. With no precise information available about the investigation, wild rumors about the case began to emerge. People simply feared opening their doors to couriers, even though during the pandemic, they were often the bearers of necessities. Several days later, on a deserted dead-end road near Rockland in northern New York, an abandoned beige sedan was found. Nearby lay the body of a man with a gunshot wound to the head. Documents found in the car quickly helped identify the deceased as 72-year-old Roy Den Hollander, a once successful lawyer. Near the body lay a pistol, and the scene resembled a self-deprivation of life, as there were no signs of struggle or the presence of third parties. These assumptions were soon confirmed, as the murder weapon bore only the victim's fingerprints. However, the weapon itself drew significant interest from investigators. It was a .380 caliber pistol, identical to the one used to end the lives of Mark Angelucci and Daniel Andrill. Ballistic analysis soon confirmed that all 3 men were deprived of life by bullets fired from this pistol. Yet, it remained unclear what motivated the shooter to end the lives of 2 men, injure another, and then fire a bullet into his own head. A search of Hollander's home indicated that he had meticulously planned the attacks in advance. His diary contained addresses of the victims and notes on the dates of the attacks. Detectives, however, could not understand the criminal's motive. However, when they found memoirs on his laptop, which Roy had been working on for years, it became clear that he was a mentally unstable individual, embittered and angry at the world, who despised everyone from his own mother and ex-wife to his neighbors, colleagues, and clients. It was only a matter of time before he would take up arms and begin to end lives. Who was Roy Den Hollander? Roy Den Hollander was born on September 26, 1947, in Midland Park, New Jersey. He had an older fraternal twin brother who died under mysterious circumstances in childhood. Roy blamed his mother for this his entire life, a sentiment he openly discussed in his memoirs, along with his hatred for his parents. He graduated from high school in 1965, then attended the prestigious George Washington University Law School, and later earned an MBA from Columbia Business School. He worked as a lawyer at several renowned firms, and in the late 1990s, he moved to Russia, where he lived for several years, working as a lawyer and private detective at Kroll Associates, a consulting firm specializing in financial issues and risk. Hollander earned significant money, which he immediately spent in various elite entertainment venues on young, beautiful women, who were his main weakness. In 2000, at a Moscow nightclub, the 52-year-old American lawyer met a 24-year-old beauty named Angelina Shipalina. Previously a professional track athlete, she later decided to switch to modeling, possessing all the attributes necessary to succeed in that field. The aspiring model quickly realized that the older American was utterly infatuated with her and decided to use him for her purposes. She swiftly swept him off his feet and gently nudged him towards marriage. After moving to the United States and obtaining a marriage visa, she soon filed for divorce. Now, Angelina could legally stay in the country and pursue her modeling career. For the lawyer, this turn of events was a huge blow. He realized that the beauty had merely used him to achieve her own goals, playing with his emotions. He came to despise all women, a sentiment he eloquently expressed in his memoirs. He referred to his former wife as a venal woman, willing to do anything for money, and also accused her of connections with the Russian mafia. Fundamental stance and puzzling motives for the crimes. Following his tumultuous divorce from Shipalina, Roy became a self-proclaimed anti-feminist and an active advocate for men's rights. However, his behavior grew increasingly eccentric and flamboyant. Unlike Angelucci, who provided free assistance to men affected by domestic abuse and handled custody issues during divorces, Hollander became notorious for his frivolous and unsuccessful lawsuits. For instance, he objected to ladies' night promotions in bars and nightclubs where women are offered free admission and complimentary drinks. Yet, it remained unclear why Roy chose his victims and sought to deprive them of life. The situation with Angelucci was particularly puzzling, since they were effectively colleagues, both fighting for men's rights. The answer to this question was soon found in the criminal's memoirs. It turned out that Roy saw Mark as a rival and was extremely jealous of him because Mark was far more successful in his career, commanded widespread respect, and held considerable influence, whereas Hollander had been mostly ridiculed for his antics and bizarre lawsuits over the last decade. Furthermore, both lawyers were members of the same men's rights community, making Roy appear even more outlandish and unsuccessful by contrast. About a year before these tragic events, he was expelled from the community for aggressive and inappropriate behavior. Roy's personal life and career spiraled downward after his divorce from the Russian model. He fell into depression, developed problems with alcohol and anger management, and started losing most of the cases he took on. Esther Salas, as a judge, presided over several cases Hollander had handled at different times, consistently ruling against him, which led him to long-list her as one of his sworn enemies. However, neither Salas, Angelucci, nor any of their colleagues considered Roy to be dangerous. But in 2018, when he was diagnosed with cancer, The lawyer likely felt he had nothing left to lose and began devising a plan for revenge and the elimination of his enemies. The long list of revenge. Hollander never made explicit threats, so it was difficult to determine whom he considered his enemies. However, in his memoirs and notebooks, a lengthy list of names was found with whom the lawyer apparently planned to settle scores. This list included not only judges and fellow lawyers, but also the doctors who treated him, whom he accused of incompetence and intentionally treating him poorly, allowing his disease to progress. Detectives checked all the other individuals on the list and, ensuring they were alive, warned them of potential danger, as it was unclear whether the criminal had acted alone or had accomplices. It also remained unclear why Roy stopped and unexpectedly settled accounts with life. There was speculation that this was due to the deteriorating state of his health. Hollander's memoirs contained over 2,000 pages. Also, about a dozen notebooks and diaries were found among his personal belongings, which needed to be meticulously examined. This process took several weeks, but ultimately established that the criminal acted alone and had no accomplices, meaning that everyone else on the list was safe following Roy's death. Daniel Anderl's Law. After the attack, Mike Anderl spent over half a year in the hospital undergoing a challenging rehabilitation process due to 3 gunshot wounds. His wife, Esther Salas, remained in a prolonged state of depression due to the loss of their only son. However, in February 2021, she agreed to give an extensive interview for the television news magazine 60 Minutes, where she spoke publicly for the first time about the horrific events and the tragedy that struck their family. Simultaneously, the judge began working on legislative changes in New Jersey. A new law, adopted in December 2021, was named after her late son, Daniel. The new amendments introduced a prohibition on the public disclosure of judges' addresses and other contact information, ensuring the safety and privacy of public officials and their family members. On the night of December 1, 2010, Staff Sergeant Nathan Payette was in a hurry. He was late for duty at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. By a strange coincidence, his alarm clock, which never failed to go off, did not ring today. Nathan woke up at 11 p.m. and woke up his wife, Michelle. He took a shower, said goodbye to his family. Then he went out to the garage. He was about to put on his uniform and start the car. Suddenly, loud shots rang out from behind. Mr. Payette's children and wife came running to the noise. On the doorstep stood Nathan, bleeding and staggering from side to side. It was obvious that he was about to fall. Michelle was terrified and rushed towards her husband to pick him up, but not in time. The father of the family collapsed to the floor. Around 11:30 p.m., 911 received a call. "My husband has been shot. He's bleeding. Help him!" Mrs. Payette screamed into the phone. The dispatcher immediately explained to the woman how to administer first aid. Michelle tried to give artificial respiration to her spouse. However, it did not bring relief. After the arrival of rescuers, he was taken to the nearest hospital. Doctors did everything possible to save the patient. Despite this, it was not possible to bring the young man back to life. The neck wound became fatal for 28-year-old Nathan Payette. After Mrs. Payette was informed of her husband's death, her life was divided into before and after. An exemplary family man, a valiant serviceman, was murdered on the doorstep of his own home in Las Vegas. His death caused a public outcry. Relatives, acquaintances, and just concerned citizens were waiting for explanations from the police. Who could decide to such lawlessness? What motives pursued the criminal and was subsequently brought to justice? These and other questions we will try to analyze together with you. Nathan Joseph Villagomez Payette was born on February 12, 1982, in the village of Tamuning, Guam. The territory of the island is not part of the United States of America, but it is a possession of the United States. At the same time, the United States determines foreign policy and does not interfere in internal affairs. Guam is a small island in the Pacific Ocean. Due to its paradisiacal beauty and historical past, this area is especially popular among tourists. Nathan was not only born in an amazing region, He was also fortunate to have a large and loving family. He had 3 brothers, Matthew, Anthony, Eric, and 1 sister, Carmela. The children were very friendly and helped their parents in everything. Nathan himself was different from the others in that he never caused trouble. He was a caring child at home and a diligent student at school. The boy was very sociable, so he easily made friends. He was the soul of the company. His name was always on the rumor. Perhaps there was no one who did not want to communicate with him, recalled about him brother Eric. Living near the ocean, Nathan loved swimming from childhood. Later, he began surfing. He spent all his free time on the beach, enjoying the sun and life. Nathan met his future wife during his studies at South High School. The educational institution was located in the neighboring town of Santa Rita. Michelle Ann Vonta-Chuck was attracted to him at first sight. Young people began to spend time together. With each day, their affection for each other only grew. They never parted. Together, they studied at school, prepared for classes, helped with household chores. Strong teenage friendship was replaced by tender love. When Michelle was 16 years old, a terrible grief befell her family. Her mother died. Therefore, the girl spent all her free time helping her sister. Melissa, the eldest of Chuck's family, took on the role of mother and mistress of the house. Nathan supported her in everything she did and helped to look after the younger children. In 2000, after graduation, Nathan decided to propose to Michelle. The girl happily accepted. Their families did not have the opportunity to have a wedding. Therefore, the couple with the blessing of their parents decided to move in together. To earn a living, the guy got a job as a receptionist in a local hotel. He earned not badly. There was enough money. However, like all young people, Nathan and Michelle were ambitious. They made plans for their own home and independence. Soon their son Dion was born in the Pyatt family. The income was no longer enough to cover the necessary expenses. Therefore, the guy thought about a job that could provide his family with a decent existence. This desire led Nathan to join the Air Force. After graduation, Nathan was assigned to the Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage, Alaska. Michelle was left alone with the baby, but the family had money. In addition, after a while, the young people's dream came true. They built their own house. In it was born a second child, a daughter named Niara. The head of the family made success in the military field. This favored the desire to achieve everything that he and his wife had previously been deprived of. Finally, 6 years after their engagement, Michelle and Nathan had a big wedding. My mom was extremely proud that her youngest son was the first to go out and achieve something, Eric said. In 2006, Nathan was transferred to the Davis-Monthan military base in Arizona. He was promoted to the position of weapons loading team leader for the A-10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft of one of the Essex squadrons. There he also trained in logistics training and material management. Nathan definitely loved his job and did it with dedication. Most importantly, he did it with the best of intentions. He was a son of his country. One of his co-workers characterized him. In 2007, Nathan and his family moved to Nellis Air Base. The new job was located near Las Vegas, Nevada. There, the young man was assigned as an assistant junior officer in charge of the supply section for maintenance of combat aircraft. Along with professional growth, the family of the protagonist grew. Soon, the Pyatt couple had 2 more sons, Drawson and David. Michelle fell in love with Las Vegas. She thought it was the best place to live, so Nathan decided to make her happy. He chose the most suitable house for a large family, spacious and bright. In addition, the future family home was 30 to 40 minutes away from the military base. Nathan made the down payment with his savings. The only thing left to do was to divide the family's income and expenses wisely. Maybe he could save some money temporarily, at least until Mr. Pyatt's next prospects. At first, Michelle was delighted with her husband's surprise. She set about organizing the everyday life in the new house. However, over time, the demands of the couple began to grow. The family spent more than Nathan earned. The happiness of buying a new house began to fade. It is well known that financial difficulties have ruined the relationship of more than one couple. Nathan and Michelle were no exception to this axiom. the man realized that the deplorable situation had to be corrected. Therefore, in mid-2009, when the USA was at war with Iraq, Nathan enlisted as a volunteer. His departure took 6 months. During this time, the family's condition improved considerably, which Nathan could not help but enjoy. After a short rest at home, Sergeant Paye decided to return to Iraq. While Nathan was risking his life, Michelle was overcome by anxiety. She had intrusive thoughts. The prospect of being alone with 4 children frightened her. Accustomed to a certain standard of living, she found it hard to imagine otherwise. To take her mind off her worries, Mrs. Payette took a job. The firm that took the new hire was a corporate credit card telemarketing firm. Employment brought variety and new acquaintances to the woman's routine. In addition, Michelle wanted to have her own safety cushion. She did not rule out having her own business in the future, so she actively engaged in self-development. She began to attend the School of Aesthetics. Everything went on as usual while Nathan was at home. When he left, Michelle became bored. The birth of the children, the endless travels, and her husband's service cooled the relationship between the couple. Nathan was away for long periods of time, and Michelle wanted to be loved and desired, so she took a lover. It became her colleague, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez, 31-year-old handsome and a local womanizer. Plus, the man was devious and dishonest. He spent 2007 in prison for forgery and attempted theft. Michelle couldn't resist Sweet Rudy. That's what they jokingly called Michael behind his back. By the end of 2009, Nathan returned home. It seemed that the distance and the ordeal went in favor of the family relationship. However, this was not the case. The wife was playing a double game. She did not want to lose her husband, having an infatuation on the side. Therefore, she tried to please him in every way. Nathan was fascinated by the changes that had taken place in her appearance and character. The children had been growing up without a father for a long time, which had a negative impact on their education. He decided not to leave his family for a long time. It did not occur to him that the striking changes Michelle could be associated with treason. So pure and faithful was Nathan himself. In Las Vegas, a man found a good way to earn money. In order to get double pay, he started working night shifts. In addition, Nathan took up private teaching. He developed training for simplified baseball for young children. As for Michelle's pretense, it didn't last long. As soon as the usual standard of living began to fall, the spouse changed her attitude to the opposite. After a while, the problems in the couple's relationship went beyond. At Thanksgiving in 2010, the young family was visited by brother Eric and his wife Veronica. For the first time, the guests sensed the tension between the Payettes. They had changed beyond recognition. It seemed that the former feelings between Michelle and Nathan completely disappeared. The couple could not hide from outsiders not only personal, but also financial problems, almost empty pantry and refrigerator. A week later. On December 1st, 2010, a strange communication took place between Mrs. Payette and Mr. Rodriguez. At 11:12 p.m., Michelle received a text message from Michael. "Hope you are feeling better," the man wrote. "Van Dyke's contract for tomorrow is almost finalized." 2 minutes later, he sent another text. "If you're not feeling well, let me know. I'll give you a couple days to rest. Remember, I appreciate your help." At 11:19 p.m., Michelle replied, "My husband just recently woke me up. Right now, he is trying to leave the house, but I think he's going to be late today. LOL, I'm sorry the contract is giving you so much trouble." A couple months before the tragedy, Michelle didn't want to be with Nathan, nor was she going to leave him, because she realized that breaking up wouldn't do anything, except headaches and empty pockets. "I don't think he will forgive me and support me after the divorce," Michelle thought. "The alimony would hardly be enough for a normal life." In addition, Mrs. Payette was aware of her husband's military insurance. In the event of his death, payments totaling about $65,000 were due to the wife. These sinful thoughts did not give rest to the woman's sick mind. One day she shared them with Michael. Surprisingly, he was intrigued. So the terrible idea of Nathan's former lover turned into a cunning plan. Mr. Rodriguez knew that Michelle and he could not do it alone. It was too complicated, so he enlisted his friend, Corey Alexis Hawkins, in the criminal scheme. The 33-year-old mercenary had about 9 convictions, each one of them related to theft or fraud. Corey was a hardened criminal, so he agreed to help on the condition of a substantial reward. He estimated his participation at $20,000. After thinking hard, Michelle and Michael agreed. A little later, a couple more people joined their group: 23-year-old Jessica Austin, Corey's girlfriend, and her friend Shannon. By the way, Jessica's friend was not particularly intelligent. She earned her living by starring in adult movies. Shannon was offered 5% of Corey and Jessica's royalties for her help. The fabulous money turned the woman's head. The original plan was to shoot Nathan in his Chevrolet Tahoe. After that, the criminals intended to drive the car with the man's body and leave it in the parking lot of one of the apartment complexes. Jessica had to buy the things necessary for the crime: men's gloves, a car cover, and a fragrance. Shannon's job was to provide an alibi for Michael. If anything, she had to confirm that on the day of the murder, Michael was by her side. On December 1st, 2010, Michelle felt ill. She deviated from her usual schedule and reported home at around 5:30 p.m. Michelle did not normally arrive so early. Her classes at beauty school were ending late, around 10:40 p.m. Mrs. Payette's foot crossed the threshold of the house just 5 minutes before Nathan left for work. On that unfortunate day, Michelle saw her husband sleeping on the sofa. She woke him up and suggested that they go upstairs to lie together. He didn't object. That was the last night the couple spent together. Late for work, Nathan went downstairs. Just at that time, Michelle was corresponding with Michael. In order not to arouse suspicion, the accomplices corresponded using code words. The instigator himself, along with his accomplice, was sitting in a black Cadillac SRX. The car was parked just ahead of the future victim's house. The perpetrators wore latex gloves so as not to leave any traces. Michael realized that the sergeant's military training could play into the latter's hands, so he decided to take him by surprise and approached him from behind. Michael drew his pistol and shot Nathan 5 times in the back. Michael quickly ran out of the garage, got into his car, and drove away. The perpetrators then fled to a previously prepared place. They burned the clothes in the fireplace and disposed of the rest of the evidence. After that, Michael with Shannon went to the hotel. In this way, the couple wanted to create an alibi. In parallel, Jessica engaged in a thorough cleaning of the apartment in which they stayed. Together with the emergency services, police officers arrived at the scene. They were stunned by what had happened. The neighborhood where the Payette family lived was considered one of the exemplary ones. Detective Todd Williams first decided to examine the scene of the shooting. The garage door was unlocked. There was a noticeable odor of iron inside the room. Blood was smeared on the walls in the car, and traces of it were also visible on the floor. Next to Nathan's uniform were his keys and wallet. Since the valuables were untouched, a robbery murder was ruled out. After examining the scene, Detective Laurie Anderson decided to talk to the victim's wife. Michelle explained what had happened. For some reason, she added that the family was struggling financially. This gave the police some ideas. Maybe Nathan was hiding something from his wife, for example, a gambling addiction, debts, or an affair on the side. At least that would have cleared up the attack. Besides, all the evidence pointed to Nathan being deliberately set up. The police examined the victim's cell phone. It contained only pictures of his wife and children. This convinced the officers that Mr. Payette was a decent man. The investigation continued. The next step in the search for the perpetrator was to canvass the neighborhood. Statistically speaking, there's always someone who saw or heard something. This was the case with Nathan. Some neighbors reported that they had seen a car parked near the Payette house. The car was driven by a man wearing a brown sweatshirt. After shots were fired, the vehicle immediately drove away. Detectives finally had a lead. Nathan's family was shocked to learn what had happened. His family was on the first flight out of Guam. They were waiting for answers. His mother, Carmelita Payet, cried the whole way. The woman couldn't believe her son had died so early. The relatives finally reached the victim's home. Michelle threw herself into her mother-in-law's arms and then lost consciousness. Nathan's mother sensed something unnatural in her daughter-in-law's reaction. For some reason, the fainting seemed faked. The investigators decided to talk to Mrs. Payet again. They asked her about the car that the witnesses had seen. Unexpectedly, she said that her colleague, Michael Rodriguez, had a similar car. Why Michelle gave out this information remains unclear. However, thanks to her, the puzzle began to take shape. Police later determined that Michelle had simply blabbed the truth, or the plan the perpetrators were hatching was flawed. Detectives looked into Michael's identity. The man's criminal record heightened suspicions. He was brought in for questioning, to which he responded calmly. Mr. Rodriguez said that on the day of Nathan's murder, at around 9 p.m., he went out shopping. In the supermarket, the man met an interesting girl named Shannon. From his words, they had a long conversation, after which they decided to continue their acquaintance in the hotel room. Michael explained that they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. To verify the man's words, the officers called Shannon. She did indeed confirm the romantic encounter. However, the detectives sensed a catch, so the next step was to examine the information in Mrs. Payet's phone. Specialists managed to recover the correspondence Michelle had with Michael for a year. Their communication was interesting. On the day of Nathan's murder, the couple discussed a contract with a certain Van Dyke. The conversation was more like encryption than a business negotiation. It was probably how the two men planned the crime. Investigators were almost certain that both were involved, but sufficient evidence had not yet been obtained, so they decided to let Michael go until the circumstances of the case are clarified. After examining Michelle's cell phone, the detectives called her back in for questioning. She was visibly agitated and seemed to be hiding something. Michelle realized that the officers knew more than she wanted to know, so she told them about her affair with Michael. A little later, she confessed that a few months before her husband's death, she and her lover had decided to kill Nathan. The woman explained that the action was planned in order to obtain insurance payments. Mrs. Payet justified herself and assured that she had repented and changed her mind. It was as if she had changed her mind at one stage in the preparation of the crime. She felt sorry for her husband, and she even tried to interfere with the plan. So she turned off her husband's alarm clock. Michelle was counting on her accomplices not waiting for Nathan or missing him. But the investigators did not believe in the woman's remorse. Her correspondence eloquently testified otherwise. In addition, she sent Michael a cute smiley face right after she learned of her husband's death. After a while, Shannon came to the police station to confess. The woman must have realized her predicament. However, her involvement in the case was clearly embellished. She explained that Michael had forced her to provide an alibi. Jessica asked for my help. Her friends wanted to teach a big drug dealer a lesson. My job was only to cover up the involvement of one of the attackers. I thought it would be a way to get justice, she explained. She then added that on the night of the attack, Michael told the whole truth. Shannon assured police officers, "As soon as I realized I was being used, I immediately went to the police. In addition, I feared for my life. There is no telling what they would have done to me." The woman's words were confirmed by the hotel's CCTV footage. It became clear that Michael and Shannon arrived at the hotel not at 11 p.m., as Michael himself said, but at 11:40 p.m. Her testimony led detectives to Corey and Jessica. Corey had long denied any involvement in the case. He knew what a guilty plea would do to a repeat offender. But Jessica did reveal her role in the sinister plan. To honor the young sergeant's memory, Nathan's family and friends gathered on December 7, 2010, in the chapel at the Nellis base. Michelle decided to skip the ceremony. She was clearly not in the mood for it. Many comrades remembered the man's stamina and military hardiness. The commander of the squadron told about the feats he had accomplished for his country and his family. Everyone characterized Nathan as a reliable comrade in arms. At the same time, they noted his modesty and decency. In his speech, Eric Pyatt recalled, "My brother has always been an example for me and the rest of my family. He truly loved life, was devoted to his wife and children. Everything Nathan ever did, he did in the name of his homeland, love, and friends." On December 9th, the remains of the slain man were transported to Guam. On December 15th, a requiem mass was held at St. Francis Church in Tamuning. Military honors were paid to the sergeant at the Piti City Cemetery on the island of Guam. His funeral was spectacular. The cortege consisted of 36 motorcycles. Upon arrival at the burial site, 6 officers carried out a casket covered with a U.S. flag. Afterward, 21 shots shook the sky. Nathan Pyatt was given a hero's farewell. Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, and Jessica Austin were arrested without bail on December 8, 2010. The next day, the same fate awaited Michelle Pyatt. The police feared for the mental state of the accused. She was placed under surveillance to prevent her from committing suicide. On January 4, 2011, in Clark County District Court, the 4 accomplices were read the charges. They were charged with conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, and murder with a firearm. Michael and Corey were additionally charged with possession of a firearm. The trials dragged on for 3 years. Some of the defendants denied involvement. Armed with a strong defense team, the defendants filed more than one motion. Their aim was to exclude certain evidence and proofs from the case. However, the court rejected all the applications. They only delayed the inevitable punishment by postponing the sessions from one date to another. On September 21, 2015, the trial for the murder of Nathan Pyatt did take place. Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first to stand trial. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. On September 29, 2015, the man was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael's appeal of the sentence was denied. At the time the sentence was announced, the defendant expressed no emotion. Apparently, he did not regret the crime he had committed. The trial of Michelle Pyatt took place in a Las Vegas court a month later. The woman continued to insist that she had changed her mind about killing her husband. When the judge allowed Michelle to say a few words in her defense, she turned to the parents of the murdered man. With tears in her eyes, she apologized to them. "I loved Nathan and our children. I was very confused and made a big mistake," Michelle pronounced and once again fainted. The prosecutor said she did not believe the defendant wanted to thwart the conspiracy. There was a lot of evidence to the contrary. No one could understand how a woman, a mother of 4 children, could become so cold-blooded. The judge sided with the prosecution. Michelle was clearly involved in the crime, at least more than she claimed in court. Michelle soon pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm. This helped her avoid capital punishment. The Pyatt family also asked the court not to impose the death penalty on the former relative. At the end of the hearing, the judge called Michelle's crime incomprehensible and unfathomable. In October 2015, it was the turn of a third defendant, Corey Alexis Hawkins. The man also agreed to a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. Corey was sentenced to life in prison. His attorney's petition to ever get parole was denied. The judge reasoned that the defendant helped plan the crime and was nearby at the time of the shooting. Jessica Austin also took a plea deal with prosecutors. She was later charged with conspiracy to commit murder. In March 2016, Michelle was given her final sentencing. She once again cited her unstable emotional state that led her to commit the crime. She again asked Nathan's family to ever forgive her. Carmelita Pyatt was a deeply religious person. She could see that her former daughter-in-law was remorseful for what she had done and was truly tormented by remorse. Her soul needed forgiveness. Therefore, Nathan's mother forgave Michelle in the courtroom. Afterwards, she added that the most important punishment in life, Michelle had already suffered. "Your children don't want to see you anymore. They're afraid you'll do to them what you did to their father," Carmelita explained. "Our family does not pursue the principle of an eye for an eye," Eric Pyatt informed her. I think Michelle was shaken by her mother-in-law's words. Her family will move on without her, and the children will grow up knowing their mother is a murderer. Eric's wife, Veronica, also asked to speak out. She told Michelle that she hated her, after which she added that the relative dishonors the family name she carries. In pursuit of greed and the love of a man she didn't know, Michelle destroyed her family. She became the murderer of the man she once loved immensely, with whom she shared a bed and built a future. Could Michelle have imagined how her unbridled ambition would turn out? Hardly. This category of people lives in a perpetual pursuit of happiness without appreciating what they have. Nathan, unlike her, had lived his whole life giving of himself. He was often sleep-deprived, risked his health and his life. Thanks to this, the man fulfilled his beloved's dreams, but never found her recognition. The children of the Payette family will remain traumatized for life. They will hardly be able to create strong families and socialize. The painful experience of their parents will remain in front of their eyes for the rest of their days. There is only one good thing about this story. The 4 criminals will stay where they belong. Began on a Saturday evening in July 2011 during a dance lesson when Joseph Saunier, a respected and wealthy pathologist, first met Richelle Tina, a single man, famous in his city and beyond, enjoying freedom, status, and money, and a beautiful, sweet woman, almost 10 years younger than Joseph, successful and living a life of pleasure. Meeting on the dance floor was the beginning of their story, which unfortunately ended in tragedy. At that moment, when the ideal partnership in the dance grew into a tender and passionate romance, no one could not even imagine what events would follow after a while. The biography of Joseph Saunier, before meeting Richelle, is a path full of joys and tragedies. Born in 1955 in a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana, Joseph from childhood dreamed of continuing the work of the family and become a doctor. With outstanding abilities, the young man earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science cum laude from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. The young man perfectly combined his university studies and work. Wanting to achieve professionalism in his chosen activity, he constantly took additional workload at the university and honed his knowledge and practice at the hospital. The management noticed the success and zeal of the young employee, and in the last year of training he received the position of chief resident. Upon completion of his studies, Joseph chose the field of pathologic anatomy, later becoming a respected pathologist and laboratory director in Lubbock, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by the tragic loss of the woman he loved. His marriage, which lasted 27 years and which he considered happy, ended in divorce. His wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her choice and agreed to divorce, believing that the man he loved had found his happiness. Dr. Saunier had a strong character and a great sense of nobility and responsibility. After the divorce, he maintained a very warm relationship with Becky and continued to support his 2 sons, showing resilience and strength of character. When Becky died 2 years later at the hands of her new husband Joseph, shocked by the heinous death of his former spouse, once again experienced a wave of grief and loss. He repeatedly recalled the family years gone by and mourned the loss. However, the doctor remained a pillar for the family. He immediately took over all the organizational issues and funeral expenses and helped his sons to survive the trauma. The children later admitted that it was his support that helped each of them overcome the pain. The tragedy left a deep mark on Joseph's heart. For a while, he fully devoted himself to work and the upbringing of 2 sons. Later, the grief he experienced led to a reassessment of life. The man decided to start a new personal chapter in a new city and with a new woman. In 2007, Dr. Saunier moved with his sons from Dallas to Lubbock, Texas, where he accepted a position as chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for something new to refresh him and fill the void inside, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes, also because it was a place where he met different women. A couple of times he even tried unsuccessfully to build relationships with his dance partners. And then, one warm summer evening, Richelle Tina appeared at the dance class. Elegant, graceful, refined woman with a sense of humor and lively eyes attracted Dr. Saulnier's attention at first sight. Her smile lit up the room, and Joseph realized she was exactly who he was looking for. Rochelle, for her part, also noticed the confident and respectful man moving deftly on the dance floor. Rochelle, 47, and Joseph, 57, paired up, complementing each other perfectly in the dance. With each new session, they realized they were growing closer. Dr. Saulnier suggested dating, and Rochelle agreed. Thus began a new, as it seemed at the time, happy chapter in the lives of both of them. Rochelle had an attractive and innate charm that had such a strong influence on men that they were willing to change their lives, destroy marriages, and commit criminal acts for her. Rochelle was one of those women who have a unique magnetism, attract attention, and cause passion. Such are called fatal women. Joseph and Rochelle's paths would not cross until a July evening because she had previously lived in Amarillo, a couple hours by car from Lubbock. In fact, they were both starting a new life with a clean slate after personal love dramas. Leaving Amarillo, Dr. Saulnier's new lover was running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic in plastic surgery and cosmetology. The woman met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. Initially, there was a purely friendly communication, then a slight flirtation, after a spark between them, and began a romance. Rochelle was a free, accomplished woman. For a long time, she worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and did not need anything. 4 children are grown. She owed no one anything. Unlike Mike, who was bound by the bonds of marriage, a plastic surgeon began leading a double life. A few months later, his wife found out about the affair and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike was so infatuated with Rochelle that he almost did not notice how a huge stage of his life ended. He decisively separated from his wife. For Rochelle, who had never claimed to be married to Mike, an exciting affair from which she wanted only joy and ease turned into a union that required her to be just as maniacally obsessed with her partner. Not getting the attention he expected, Mike tried to pressure Rochelle, which only served to scare her away. Seeing the manipulation and the desire to completely control her life, the young woman decided to part with the plastic surgeon, and in 2010, the paths of former lovers parted. Nevertheless, even after the breakup, Mike for a long time pursued Rochelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeded all healthy boundaries, forcing Rochelle to decide to move to disappear from his sight and free herself from his oppressive influence. That's how Rochelle found herself in Labico, intent on starting a new life. Dr. Saulnier and the beautiful, cheerful partner quickly hit it off. Gradually, their relationship grew into true love. Sons and relatives willingly accepted the new lover and were happy for Joseph. The man spared nothing for her, showered her with gifts, invited to the best restaurants and private clubs in the city, took her on trips. After Joseph realized that he finally found a worthy woman with whom he was ready to tie his life, he took her to Los Angeles and, in the presence of his entire family, made a proposal. At that moment, Rochelle was 47 years old, and she was literally crazy about her new man. Her personal page and social networks was filled almost daily with love confessions to Joseph. Of course, Mike Dixon couldn't help but see these confessions. The former lover was emotionally shocked to learn that Rochelle not only meets with a new man, but also openly confesses his love and is going to marry him. He realized that it would not be possible to get his former friend back, but he dared to offer her to resume the former format of meetings and become at least lovers. The idea to form a love triangle did not find a response. Rochelle firmly rejected the proposal and told Joseph about everything. After a while, the couple began to feel that they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something resembling a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not fully realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation spiraled out of control on July 11, 2012. A landscaper who had arrived at the doctor's home to discuss an upcoming remodel contacted emergency services. Upon arriving at the customer's home, he attempted to contact the owner, but received no response. The man noticed an open door and, assuming Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. He saw the house in disarray, and most disturbing was the presence of a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The designer cautiously walked further inside in search of the homeowner and then examined the garage, where he found Joseph Saunier lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. The doctor's body bore evidence of stab and gunshot wounds. Concluding that the perpetrator might be somewhere nearby, the designer immediately left the house and summoned help by telephone. At 2:48 in the afternoon, the police department received a call, and several patrol cars were immediately dispatched to the scene. Arriving officers found the victim of the crime, identified as Joseph Saunier, a 57-year-old pathologist. Medics confirmed the death of his colleague. The incident shocked the public as it occurred in one of the city's most peaceful, safe, and upscale neighborhoods with virtually zero crime. Dr. Saunier, a member of a respected profession, was known for his calmness and kindness and had no apparent enemies willing to harm him. Although a window had been broken, what had happened was not a robbery, for nothing was missing from the house. A bottle with the bottom shot through was found at the scene. It appeared to have been used as an improvised silencer for a firearm. A short time later, a forensic team arrived to collect evidence for examination. Apparently, the assailant was inexperienced as he left ample traces of the scene. DNA collected from the bottle used as a silencer, and blood samples found were sent to a lab for further testing. Neighbors interviewed by detectives claimed they did not see or hear anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered the house using a panoramic window overlooking the backyard, a circumstance that made his attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted his victim and began shooting. It was most likely at this point that the wine bottle was used as a silencer. Judging by the traces of blood left in the hallway, the doctor was still alive after the shots were fired. He went into the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed the victim a number of times. An autopsy on the body found 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances indicated that the murder was not a random crime. What remained unclear was who had done it and why. The investigation focused on the pathologist's close social circle. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancée recounted strange events in her and Joseph's life in the last months before the tragedy. According to her, it appeared that Dr. Saunier was being stalked. In addition, Rochelle herself had seen a stranger standing in front of Joseph's house watching the door and windows. She also described persistent calls and texts that began to be received by her fiancé just prior to his death. Officers verified the information, but believed the calls and messages came from other women with whom Joseph appeared to be in a parallel relationship, as there were witnesses who said the man was in contact with several women at once. Investigators asked Rochelle if she was aware of the other women. She answered that she was not. Joseph's sons denied the possibility that their father could have had mistresses, as cheating is not in the character of their father. However, investigators continued to develop a version of the crime motivated by jealousy. At the next interrogation, Rochelle could not withstand the pressure, cried, and admitted that she knew several women, probably involved in the crime. According to her, several former girlfriends were constantly stalking Joseph. He ignored them, but they never stopped expressing their displeasure about his future wedding. One of them turned out to be a lady from Florida who continued to persistently call and write even after Dr. Saunier revealed his serious relationship with Rochelle. Another was a nurse, a colleague of the pathologist, who also called and wrote to him regularly. The third was a woman with a daughter who, shortly before the murder, had sent a letter to Joseph, accusing him of abandoning her and her child. At the same interview, Rochelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. Until then, she hadn't connected the surveillance of her and Joseph to Mike, since Mike had completely stopped paying attention after her refusal to become a mistress. She assumed he had accepted her marriage and moved on with his life. The police had a viable suspect and they went to talk to the plastic surgeon. Mike willingly went to talk to the detectives. He admitted that he had indeed been deeply in love with Rochelle and had divorced his wife in the name of that love in an effort to create an opportunity for their future together. He admitted that the separation was a blow to him, and for some time he tried to get Rochelle back. She remained adamant, however. and he eventually relented and found a new woman, considerably younger than himself. His new girlfriend, a medical student, confirmed his alibi, as Mike was at work at the time of the crime and then spent time with her. The investigation ran into difficulties. All the suspects, including Rochelle herself, had incontrovertible alibis. Detectives tried to identify possible enemies of the murdered or people financially interested in his death, but no new figures were found. By the time the lab results came back, the situation appeared to be a dead end. The forensic results, unfortunately, did not add any clarity. The DNA sample from the bottle did not belong to the victim. However, the police database was unable to determine whose sample was found at the crime scene. And that's when law enforcement officials got unusually lucky. The police department received a call from Paul Reynolds, an aspiring EMT from Amarillo. According to him, he was sharing housing with a buddy named Dave Shepard, who had recently confessed to a murder committed in Lubbock, after which he attempted to take his own life, but was rescued. Paul relayed information that a neighbor had told him details of the crime, including specific details that only a small circle of detectives might have known, such as the use of a bottle muffler. The officers realized that Shepard was indeed involved in the crime. A witness who called claimed that Dave was only the perpetrator and that the person who ordered the crime was an unknown doctor associated with plastic surgery. Officers immediately began running a background check on the new suspect and found that Shepard had a violent criminal history with theft and hooliganism, but no major crimes. They determined that he was divorced, unemployed, and had been caught stealing on several occasions, including one where he stole $30,000 from a prominent businessman. Dave was taken to the station for questioning, and pretty quickly he began to confess, confirming that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to Dave, the meeting with the plastic surgeon took place in a bar where both found themselves going through painful breakups with their partners. Under the influence of alcohol, the casual conversation turned into a true friendship. Mike Dixon told a sad love story, complained about Rochelle, who had left him and was now about to marry someone else. The man shared that he can't get over his former partner and is willing to do anything to get her back. Deciding that the only obstacle is Dr. Sonnier, Mike and Dave devise a plan. However, their intentions, according to Dave, did not include murder. They simply wanted to slander the pathologist so that proud Rochelle would leave him and want to return to Mike. First of all, they found women who were paid handsome sums of money, $1,000 each, to play the role of mistresses and pursue Sonnier. Then came a letter from a woman with a child claiming that Joseph had abandoned her. Dr. Sonnier denied it each time, and Rochelle believed him. It also turned out that the camera flash the couple had seen was the light from Dave's cell phone flashlight, who regularly drove to their house and played up the surveillance. Each such trip was financed by Mike Dixon, handing out money for gas and related expenses. When spying and slander failed to separate the lovers, Mike set out to fix the problem in a radical way. He told his friend that he wanted him to kill the pathologist. As payment, Dixon offered 3 silver bars totaling about $10,000. Dave agreed. One of the bars given as a deposit, the hired killer immediately cashed in at a pawn shop. According to Dave Shepard, when he arrived at Dr. Sonnier's house, things got out of control. It was an unintentional shooting. I got scared and he started walking away down the hallway. When I came to my senses from the shock, I shouted, "Dr. Sonnier, are you all right?" Hearing nothing back, I followed him into the garage. He was lying there flat. I distinctly heard his last breath, and I bent down to check his pulse. There was no pulse. In his confession, Shepard claimed that he allegedly stabbed Joseph Sonnier in an irrational and foolish attempt to cover up what he called involuntary manslaughter. "I stabbed him a couple times. I don't remember how many times. You say I stabbed 11 times. I had Dr. Sonnier's phone in my hand, and I thought about dialing the emergency number to call for help, but I didn't. Maybe that's why 11 times. I put the phone back, mutilated the remains, and I went to Mike's, got the rest of the bullion, and tried to kill myself." According to Dave, agreeing to the crime, he did not understand what he was agreeing to, and when he found himself in front of Joseph, he realized that he could not kill. Had it not been for an accidental gunshot, Dr. Sonnier would still be alive. The plastic surgeon was apprehended by police the same day on charges of first-degree murder based on Dave's testimony and an extensive body of other evidence, including compromising phone calls and text messages containing explicit confessions. At the first interview, detectives hoped to elicit a confession, but Mike Dixon stubbornly denied everything, demanding an attorney. A lawsuit ensued. Dave Shepard, as part of a deal with the prosecutor, immediately pleaded guilty to his role as a hired criminal and waived the right to appeal the sentence. As a result, instead of the death penalty, he received a life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon, against whom there was only circumstantial evidence, pleaded not guilty. Unexpectedly, Dave, who was a key witness for the prosecution, testified during the trial that he committed the crime on his own, without any involvement of Dixon in it. Under oath, he said that the silver bars were intended for investment in a business the two of them had intended to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial took place in 2016. Dixon was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. An appeal filed by his lawyers led to the reversal of the judgment. The man was released on bail in the amount of $2 million, but the fight for justice did not end. The prosecutor's office sought to have the sentence reinstated by the highest criminal court of the state. Otherwise, a third trial was to be held. The prosecutor's office's motion, filed on February 11, 2019, was granted. In April 2020, the bail was revoked, and an arrest warrant was again issued. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the lower court's decision and reinstated Mike Dixon's sentence. The judge ruled that the felon must continue to serve his life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon is currently incarcerated in a prison in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Joseph Saunier became part of the love triangle when he began dating Rochelle in July 2011. The woman still calls him the main love of her life and regrets that she unknowingly led a criminal to a noble, loving, and honest man.